Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of 2021. And what better way to start off the year than with the great discussion we're going to have today. First, I'd like to introduce our U.S. Transhumanist Party officer panel. I am Gennady Stoliarov II, the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. With us, we have many of our officers: David Shoemaker, our director of applied innovation; Art Ramon Garcia, our director of visual art; Arin Vahanian, our vice chairman; Dan Elton, our director of scholarship; Tom Ross, our director of sentient rights advocacy; Alexandria Black, our director of community resilience; and of course, our illustrious 2020 US presidential candidate and director of marketing, Charlie Kam. And why are we all here? We are here to converse with Natasha Vita-More, who is the executive director of Humanity Plus, a person whose name is known to every transhumanist who has been involved in the transhumanist movement, essentially since its inception. We're going to talk about her work, about her insights regarding history, regarding the present, and regarding humankind's future. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And Natasha, thank you so much for joining us today. I propose that we begin perhaps not quite at the beginning, but at a much earlier stage of the movement, where you were one of the visionaries who created the Transhumanist Manifesto and several other manifestos during that time period in 1983, the early 80s. So could you please tell us a bit about what inspired you to write that document, and in what context was it written? What was the world like when you created the Transhumanist Manifesto?
Thank you for that question, Gennady, and it's a pleasure to be here. And hello, everyone. I was inspired by many manifestos over the eons. When you look back at manifestos, they are a salvo to the public. They're a statement of a passion and an intention. And the world that I was in at that time was full of manifestos. But largely, if we look back at the Renaissance in the manifesto and the Bauhaus period, the manifesto, and abstract expressionism and the Fluxus movement, those manifestos impressed me and influenced me, especially the Bauhaus period, where you had architecture and design infiltrating the sensibility and the academics and scholarship of the mainstream. And then the Fluxus period, where you had the happenings and Capro and David Bowie and John Lennon and some of the really inspirational thinkers for social change, especially the words of John Lennon about love and you and truth. And looking at Capro and the happenings, that's where art was life and life was art. And that particular sensibility impressed me largely. Now, looking at the time frame of that, certainly the Bauhaus period was far more before the abstract expressionism, which was 50s, and the Fluxus, the 70s, and the happenings from the 70s to the 80s. But it was the abstract expressionism I loved, to look at life and our identity, our personhood, as being a canvas of who we are and how we shape or color that canvas, black and white or monochromatic or full of rich colors and shapes and forms. But it was moving off that canvas with Jackson Pollock that really set the pace for the Transhumanist Manifesto, that our canvas is not just the boundaries of our person, our body, the epidermal layer of our skin and our peripheral system, but out into the extraperipheral system and beyond our bodily form, this vehicle, into looking at where we might be headed. And again, this was before the internet. So with that as the inspiration, I'd like to say that I authored the manifesto to motivate people, and that was my primary concern. And it began as a burning passion, I will say, that I wanted to see a new type of humanity. And that was deeply ingrained in my upbringing. I'll just segue to that for a moment, because I think it will tie it in, the purposefulness of this passion. As a child, I had a couple of different diseases I overcame. But when I was in high school, I was the head of my sorority and a very active political figure in the community where I lived. And I did a lot of charity work. I worked in the hospitals as a candy stripe Many of you probably did that as well. I was a librarian in one of the biggest hospitals in the city. I also worked with the home for incurables, where people were so malformed, so disfigured that they were not allowed out in public. And I adopted families with my friends in different social groups that I was heading up. And that set the pace for me. But not only that, I was in Memphis, Tennessee at that time. I was born in New York. I'm from the East Coast. I lived in Chicago, but then my father was transferred down to Memphis. So I grew up in the 60s in Memphis. So I saw the lack of diversity and the racism. And not only that, as a woman, I felt it. I remember leaving the church at 18 years old, and I left my religion that I was brought up in because I couldn't stand another man telling me what to do. So that is the fire behind my passion in creating the manifesto. It's not just about wanting to see a better, more humane humanity. It was a more fair, equity-based humanity where there's less bias on what you look like, what your gender is, what your skin color is, how much money you have, how attractive or tall or short you are. Those things are less important than the preciousness of life. And that's where I pull in the Flexus movement's perspective of life is art and art is life. Art being fiction, movies, narratives, theater, literature, music, just a way of being in the world. The manifesto, I think, was important at that time in 1983 because this is at a time way before the internet or the World Wide Web, and way before we had genetic engineering and stem cells and the knowledge about biotechnology and nanotechnology and AI that we have today. And certainly it also linked into the first test tube baby, who was considered non-human. And that really affected me because I too went through infertility, and I lost a pregnancy. I lost a baby in 1980, and I wrote the manifesto in 1983. So I was driven largely by that as well, about looking at the vulnerability of the human body, and not just reproduction, but sustaining life. And so the purposefulness of it, to achieve the end of the manifesto, the goal of it was to look at biotechnologies and new emerging technologies like AO and nanomedicine, et cetera, to mitigate aging and disease, as well as an uplift, as you would say, an enlightenment in human consciousness, and the mindset that death could be overcome, and certainly aging and disease could be overcome.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you, Natasha, for that overview. And indeed, all of these currents, all of these ideas are evident in the text of the original Transhumanist Manifesto. And also, you've expanded upon it. You've revised it over the years. Could you please comment on some of the revisions and what motivated them?
Certainly. I think revising our ideas is something that we must be flexible and adaptable enough to do, because it's not that truth changes, but the perspective or the environment in which we live changes. And as Charlie said earlier, normal, there's what is normal. Normal changes over time. And we have a new normal today, one different than we had even a year ago, but consider 100 years ago how the concept of normal has changed over time. So I think it's very important that as critical thinkers and creative thinkers, that we question our own writing, our own works, and go back and revise and edit and update areas where we may have gotten it a little bit wrong, maybe highlight areas where we got it maybe a little bit right, but certainly to document it, to not erase, not pretend that we weren't wrong to start with, but to footnote, to endnote, and to properly and scholarly recognize where the changes are and to identify that. A couple of the biggest changes were, the first manifesto was the Transhuman Manifesto. So you were absolutely correct in stating that. Before we went online, we talked about that briefly, because we didn't have transhumanism in the 1980s. We had the transhuman, that concept as an evolution. And when I heard about the term transhuman through FM 2030 or FM Esfandiari, I just thought, wow, this is such a great idea. And it wasn't Huxley, it wasn't Alighieri Dante, and it wasn't Eliot that came up with the term transhuman in that regard. It was FM Esfandiari, and he deserves credit for that. And I believe he has gotten it sufficiently and with a level of gratitude and respect. But the idea of transhumanism as a philosophy didn't come about till 1990, 1991. And that was written by Max Moore, as you all know. But the idea of an evolutionary biology was Huxley indeed. And the idea of overcoming our human foibles, our human consciousness, or our human nature, that part, that fight or flight, that reptilian brain that gets us into all sorts of trouble, that was first identified by Alighieri Dante, and then written in the play The Cocktail Party by T.S. Eliot. So we've seen how these ideas have merged. And the reason why I edited the manifesto was because when things started shaping up, I thought, oh, I need to add to this here, or I need to move this over there. But what I love about the latest version, okay, so you asked me, so it was written in 1983, drafted in 1982, published in 1983 in a book. It was revised in 1998, and it was further revised in 2000, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have it in front of me, so I may be a little bit off on some of the dates. But I think it's the reasoning rather than the dates of what was going on in that era. When transhumanism became a movement in the 1990s and had hundreds and thousands of people interested in it, not just in Los Angeles and San Francisco and Silicon Valley, but also in Sweden and Stockholm, and as well as in London and Germany and Belgium and Italy. It started growing, and I needed to grow along with that. So I thought out turning it into the Transhumanist Manifesto in the late 80s, early 90s. In the latest rendition, I decided to deal with Donna Haraway. And I think those of you who are academics or at least postmodernists will understand this when it gets into the cyborg concept. Donna Haraway wrote a manifesto, and it became a very famous manifesto, cyborg manifesto. But I think what she was really writing about was the transhuman. But at that time, and in academics, the postmodernist agenda pretty much ran everything, and the term transhuman was kind of not in vogue. So cyborg was the term everyone used, and it got a little squirrely because the cyborg, according to Manfred Klein and Nathan Klein, who coined the term in the 1950s, meant astronauts suited for space exploration, not for longevity, not for overcoming disease, not for human enhancement as a transhuman, as we understand it. So I think there's a little bit of confusion. So I wanted to address that in the latest version of the Transhumanist Manifesto. So I take on Donna Haraway's, I'd rather be a cyborg than a goddess. Well, frankly, I'd rather be a goddess than a cyborg, but more frankly, I'd rather be a transhuman than a cyborg, because a cyborg doesn't have agency. A cyborg is just an augmentation according to the original concept and idea. So those are the reasons why, and looking at how the movement grew and where I actually grew too when I went back to school, back to academics, studied science, my ideas changed a little bit. I realized that the importance of evidence-based science, and that to just talk about science was one thing, but looking at evidence-based science is really important. And I also studied future studies, got a master's in that, and that taught me systems thinking and further looking at the tools that futurists use in strategizing the future and problem solving and looking at all angles of the situation. Well, I applied that to transhumanism as a cultural movement, and it gave me a more definitive perspective. And actually, it was kind of difficult because I wrote my thesis on the problems with transhumanism for my master's in philosophy of technology. My master's in philosophy of technology. So I applied my future skills from the science master's into the second master's. And it really was hard as hell because I had to find every problem with transhumanism, the political rivalry, some of the lack of diversity with including women and older people. Why were there so many white men? Where is the diversity here? And that was published in a couple of books, and I'd never brought too much attention to it because I didn't want to, frankly. It was a bit embarrassing. I have to say, it was like looking in your own closet and going, oh shit, what's going on? What's wrong here? But I think that now it's a time where we we've grown to become such a, I think, necessary culture rather than just a movement. We're a culture in society. And I think it's really important to go, yes, we made mistakes. These things, can be changed. And just as each one of us has made mistakes in our own lives and does our best to overcome them. So I think that the Transhumanist Manifesto, the different parts of it, there is the Transhuman Manifesto. Transhumanist Manifesto also wrote an extropic art manifesto, which was more fluxus oriented, and several others. But I think that the Transhumanist Manifesto, as I put it together most recently in 2020, we're in 2021, yeah, I think it was not 2019 and 2020, I tried to concretize it so that it was a stronger document. But the interesting thing today is that I was interviewed 2 days ago by some TV show, and they were asking about my interest in space. And I said, well, the manifesto went out on the Cassini-Huygens spacecraft. And that's true. And it was never promoted properly, but it is on the disc of the Cassini-Huygens, the CD that was put on it on its mission to Saturn. And so that was the first time the phrase "we are transhuman" went out past our Earth's placenta out into our solar system. And it's kind of quite lovely to think about that, those just words being put out there.
Yes. Now, that makes me wish that other forms of intelligent life were roaming the solar system so that they could have come into contact with the Cassini-Huygens spacecraft when it was orbiting Saturn and gotten that as their first impression of humanity rather than some of the things that go on this Earth.
Yeah, rather than some of our garbage that's out in space. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, it's also fascinating because you spoke about this at some length. Art was a crucial component of the early transhumanist movement. Indeed, you also had the transhumanist arts statement that was very expressive in its message. I linked to it in the YouTube chat as well. And it also starts with, we are transhumans. Our art integrates the most eminent progression of creativity and sensibility merged by discovery. So it's not just a movement about science or biology, it's very much a movement about art and philosophy. Could you speak more about that?
Certainly. It's interesting, and I'll be very honest with this. As most of you know, I am forthright, and I try to be forthright as nicely and kindly and sweetly as I possibly can, but I don't like bullshit at this time in my life, so I just get right to the point. I was a little bit embarrassed being an artist, I have to say. And I was a performance artist. I made films, I made videos, I won awards. My films have been in the American Film Festival, Women in Video, first place, whatnot. And it was all about identity. And they're very beautiful, short little films. I made a film inside a volcano on Haleakala, in the Amazon jungle before the first industrialization. And that was in the 1970s. So it goes way back to looking at those times. When I met the heady thinkers in Silicon Valley, remember, I was in LA, I was in the entertainment industry. I was working for Francis Ford Coppola. I was working at 20th Century Fox. I was writing for The Hollywood Reporter. I wrote the cover stories on the Telluride Film Festival. I ran a nightclub on Sunset Strip. I hightailed with Warren Beatty and Volker Schlorendorf, Bertolucci. I mean, those were my pack, my tribe. And I never thought of it as elitist at all. They were the most creative thinkers that I could come across. Buckminster Fuller. I mean, these beautiful minds and highly creative people. That to me is art. It's not a painting. It's not a dance. It's not a song. Art has always been to me the imagination that we have and how we put it forth in whatever modality it manifests is superfluous to me. It's just that creative idea, how it comes out, I just love. So that to me was high art, and I still am a high artist. But in Los Angeles, it was entertainment mostly, and I had many exhibitions and been in museums, all of that. But I didn't find that community really settled well with me. I always felt very uncomfortable. Number one, it was very egocentric. Number two, it was all about me, the artist. Number three, I felt a lack of deep thinking or critical thinking in the community, and that's not to discredit it. The creative thinking and the exuberance and the ability to break through a dogma, it was really strong in the arts, but I needed more of that intellectual stimulation. And I always have. I grew up with it, and I missed it, and I needed it. So when my TV show that I had in Los Angeles, I reached over 100,000 people. It was called Transhuman Update, Transhuman Update. It went on for about 5 years, and it was filmed in Santa Monica and aired in Los Angeles and in Telluride, where I'd lived. And I'd interview people about the future: energy, nanotechnology, AI, longevity, genetic engineering, gene therapies, anything I could get my hands on, architecture, the arts too, movies, science fiction. But there was always that issue of how do I deal with finding out where the truth of an issue lies? And I realized that Silicon Valley was in competition with LA at the time. So I started spending more time in Silicon Valley because I thought that there's some knowledge that I needed that I was missing in my own repertoire of experience. And when I met the early transhumanists in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, and some in LA, of course, and New York and Europe, against Sweden and England and Belgium, that's when I first met that larger community of transhumanists, because I was pretty much a sole practitioner in LA with just a few people and FM and his entourage, but they were his entourage. So what was interesting is most of the early transhumanists at that time in the early 1990s were computer scientists, cybersecurity, writing encryption, writing code, dealing with uploading, talking about nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, the areas that I was not so versed in. And I wanted to learn so much because in the arts and entertainment world that I had been involved in and performing in and writing in for so many years, that wasn't part of the conversation. In fact, I remember Volker Schlorendorf, the film director, the German film director who won the Academy Award for The Tin Drum, he and Bertolucci, who everyone knows, of course, sat me down and said, "Why are you so interested in technology? What, create movies, but technology is the future. I need to understand it." And it was a separation. I pretty much divorced myself from the arts at that time. And I just would go to conferences and sit in the back of the room and listen and watch and listen. I would travel a lot. And I'd go to every conference I could on computer science, cybersecurity, biotechnology, nanotechnology, anything in the technologies and the hard sciences, and just listened and watched. And it was an amazing education for me. And it made me decide that even with the manifesto and the work that I did henceforth, that you can go back to being creative, or you never have to leave it. But we need to continue to build on our knowledge base, because this, I still think, is the most important thing that we can bestow to others, our experience and our knowledge, but also that we need to keep on learning and growing. There's so much BS out there. There's so much pseudoscience. There's so many companies, especially in the longevity community, that are pushing their products that may not be as tenable as proposed in the marketing schemes. And we know this, and the social media has taken a big ride in this new industry of longevity or life extension. So we need to be more agile thinkers.
Yes, thank you, Natasha. And it's really interesting how your progression kind of created this bridge between the arts and the sciences. It rather surprised me to hear the opinion of this film director that you related, that, oh, you should just focus on making movies and not think about science and technology, when film is based on science and technology. You need a scientific and technological infrastructure to have films to begin with.
It's interesting that you say that, because the only person who never scolded me in that community of my friends and colleagues was Francis Ford Coppola. He invited me to work at Zoetrope in Los Angeles when he was making Six Shots, and he gave me a part in the movie. And it was the first film ever to be made on digital. In fact, it's hard to find on the web right now or the internet now, but back then he worked with Sony Studios out of Japan, and he used a truck. And the actors were on stage in the studio of Zoetrope, and Coppola was in a truck that had the digital editing. So he was editing his film. He wasn't filming it in chemistry. He was videotaping it in high definition that Sony had provided the equipment for. And he was editing it as he was making it. And the actors were in the studio. And I remember I took some of the thrown away garbage from the technology, and I saved it, and I turned it into silkscreen serigraph, beautiful visual pieces, very large pieces I produced in San Francisco. But I love that fact that he was the only one at that time. Of course, there was Lucas, but he was up in Lucas Valley in the north, and I was in LA. But it's fascinating, but yeah, interesting.
Yes, hopefully these days with all of the special effects and computer graphics that are in films, more people in that industry recognize the power of technology and what it can bring.
Well, they do, but they realize it for that. And then they go, well, why aren't they talking about transhumanism? And interestingly enough, where you find the theme of transhumanism in the media narrative of storytelling is in games. And H+, the symbol H+, the term H+, the ideas of transhumanism, and my name has been in many games. In fact, a student came up to me a couple of years ago and said, oh, I've been playing this game and I had to get to another level, but you had to know your quote before you got into that level. I said, what are you talking about? Because I'm not a gamer. But it's interesting that Deus Ex, Ex Machina, the transhumanist ideas are there. I just wish that it was more cohesive, or there was more of a communication between us and that industry, which I'm not a part of at the moment.
I think this is a great opportunity to bring in Arin Vahanian, our vice chairman, who got introduced to transhumanism via Deus Ex Human Revolution, which is a 2011 computer game. So Arin, could you talk about that?
Indeed, I can. It kind of seems like deja vu given our last week's panel with Francesco Neoamati. So that's absolutely right, Gennady. I would say that the video game Deus Ex Human Revolution is what really introduced me to transhumanism. And that is exactly how I got into the movement. I had always had a passion for using technology to improve the human condition, but it wasn't until playing the video game. Actually, Natasha, the video game itself references transhumanism in it multiple times.
I know they put on a conference in New York City at I think it was at Radio Center,
Right.
and I was one of the speakers along with Steve Mann, and everyone knows Steve Mann from MIT, and wearing he augmented himself with a video camera early on. So Steve and I were on stage going, what are these people doing? They were asking us questions as their keynote speakers, but what they were really doing was taking the ideas for their products. And Steve and I stayed up to 2 a.m. that night at the hotel writing another manifesto, because we knew that that's what they were doing about uploading. So we wrote our own. Yeah, I don't think anything ever came of it, but it was just kind of funny. They're a business, and so we have to realize that the entertainment industry is a business, and they have high stakes. And the gaming industry has become an incredibly fluctuating industry. I mean, there are fewer jobs in the gaming industry than there is in cybersecurity. But there's more students in gaming, whether it's game programming, game arts and animation, or game design, than in cybersecurity. Lots of games, not enough money, and now you're able to replicate games without buying new product. So it's an interesting industry. I don't know that much about it other than having been at a university that focuses on it for years.
Yes, but it does seem to be a communication medium that can reach large audiences, particularly younger people who unfortunately might not be reading as many books these days, and they do like the special effects, the participatory dynamics of games.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree.
Mhm. Now, I wanted to ask the panel if anyone has any additional thoughts about the Transhumanist Manifesto or art and transhumanism before we go on to the next but related subject area. Let's see, Tom, would you like to say a few words?
Just one comment. We're talking, we talk a lot today about bubbles, and these algorithms that place us into certain corrals. But Natasha and I realized a few months ago when speaking that we probably attended a lot of the same parties in LA in the 90s. And I was working with Marilyn Ferguson, an author who published the Brain Mind Bulletin. And so everything that she was doing, Natasha was doing at this time would have been very intriguing and interesting to our group. And even though we were probably at the same parties, probably went to the same John Lilly birthday party in Malibu once.
Yes, I was there. Yes, the dolphins, right?
And we realized that we knew so many of the same people. Her knowing Tim Leary a lot better than I.
Yeah.
But that it's funny that we had even had bubbles then. As closely related as our work was, there was still a bubble that couldn't be permeated, or something just kept it apart. But that's just fascinating. I think the algorithms today are really just an extrapolation of these bubbles that we create around ourselves without knowing it.
Well said.
But yeah, when you're talking about how you've changed or updated the manifesto over the years, and the idea of truth wasn't really changing. Although I was just having this conversation with David Shoemaker earlier today about how truth seems to be a moving target anymore.
Yeah. Where is it? How to land on it? Yeah. It's
the idea that a lot of scientific discoveries and understandings take about 50 years to filter into society. And I think that's what we're experiencing now with relativity. Everything is relative to people, and even truth is now relative.
It's true.
So there's kind of this go between a moving target of truth and the agility to find it that is interesting.
I think you parsed it out beautifully there, Tom. It's almost like being an athlete in finding truth. You find that balance, and you can be swayed this way. That's getting a little murky over there. I don't want to be involved in that. Let me go back over here, find the balance. And so I think that your phrasing, beautifully said. My only point to add to it is being cognitively or mentally agile, and I guess athletes of our minds, of information, how we absorb it and how we sort it out, and how we find elements of truth that can link together.
And David shared an interesting concept with me over the last couple of days, TAP, that brings AI into the equation. And so we were having an interesting conversation. This really ties in well with everything you've been saying.
So David, do you want to say a few words about that?
Yes, thank you. And yes, Tom, the discussion has been quite good. The discussion revolves around trying to find a way to get everybody's truth out on the table all at the same time. People bring different perspectives, how they see things together, and get out of the bipolar world that we find ourselves in, with truth being an exaggeration in one direction or the other. And stumbled across something I was reading about and sharing with Tom that allows AI to become involved and to help parse this information. And in the way that you use this, it allows you to become comfortable with your touch points in AI to where you can have confidence in it, hopefully leading to then a more generalized confidence into the future. So that's why I reached out and shared it with Tom, and I think it has some interesting aspects for transhumanism in general, and there's much more to read and much more to explore. Natasha, I would love to send some information over to you, because you would also be one to provide valuable input into this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. And we have a comment in our internal chat from Alexandria Black. And she says that for her, combining emerging technologies is much like her paint palette, finding new applications and collaboration. So again, a connection between the arts and technology, and very well said. And I also wanted to relate something that Pavel Ilin, our secretary, wanted to share with you, Natasha. And he wanted to thank you for the Transhumanist FAQ, because back in 2005, that is what brought him to the transhumanist movement and gave him awareness of essentially this burgeoning community. It was not too long before that, in 2004, that I read the Principles of Extropy formulated by Max Moore, and that was a vision that inspired me to look more deeply into transhumanism. So there's a lot of that work that essentially resonates with people throughout the years and then gets them going on this path where they delve more deeply. So thank you. Now, I wanted to go on to the next related area of discussion, which is cultural evolution and evolution in perceptions of transhumanism. Since the early 1980s, when you wrote the Transhuman Manifesto and then the Transhumanist Manifesto, how has the wider public's view of transhumanism and emerging technologies and outlooks toward the future changed? And I know you had some comments about that for Humanity Plus members at the Thanks Living gathering. I was curious if you could share them with our audience here, because I think you encapsulated very nicely some of the changes that you perceived throughout your decades of work in this field.
Where did I write that?
You offered it verbally. So you talked about some of the media perceptions that you faced early on during the movement, and then how that has changed over time.
Yes, no, a good point. Thank you. I was out there with David and Aaron and Tom and you, and just enjoying it. So I had to come back here. Okay, yes, the 1980s. It was what? It wasn't challenging. It wasn't difficult, because it was so above everyone's head that it was just like, 1990s, rubber hit the road. So it was in the 1990s, especially with the advances in computer science and with the very, very beginning of the World Wide Web. We talked about these ideas on the first email list on the web, and people got on it from New York Times, Village Voice, Chicago Tribune, London Examiner. You had journalists from all walks of life, from TV, news press. They heard about this group of people who were talking about these ideas that no one had yet to talk about, and taking it very seriously. Well, that of course was Extropy Institute. And I long for those days, and I miss those days, because I think Extropy Institute brought together the, not that any mind is richer than another, but at that time, it was the richest, most fluid, confident minds in challenging limits and challenging their own thinking. And it wasn't politicized. It wasn't, there weren't any arguments really. It was just like, what the hell's going on and what can we do? And look, this is going on. That's around the time Marshall McLuhan wrote his salvo. And what was it? The Electric Frontier Foundation developed with, I can't remember his name right offhand, but
Lawrence
Lessig.
I think it's Lawrence Lessig of the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
But it was created by it was with the Grateful Dead. I knew him. We talked, I can't remember his name right offhand, but it doesn't matter, but the Electronic Frontier Foundation, they were talking about privacy on the internet or the web. We didn't have the internet then. And what we're going to do with this, all of a sudden, cybersecurity became an issue, and encryption and blockchain. So on that email list, you had blockchain, Ralph Merkel, who's still with us today and still a very dear friend and cohort. And he wrote the Merkle tree, which is the foundation for blockchain. If you go to Wikipedia, you'll find it there under blockchain. And of course, a lot of AI head wigs. And of course, then you had Robin Hanson, economist, talking about idea futures, and he won the prize at Era Electronica, which is the world's leading creative prize. So that was really fascinating. And talking about AI and nanotechnology, all the ideas that had yet to permeate into the mainstream, and in fact had yet to permeate really in academics or in the industry. We didn't have, you know, Microsoft yet. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have any of the different big companies that we have today that really push ideas forward through their social media platforms or through the tools that they're offering us to use to spread ideas. So we had lots of conferences in Silicon Valley, in Santa Monica, Los Angeles, and those conferences were called Extro conferences. And we talked about, you know, everything. It was really groundbreaking and wonderful. And the core focus of it was none less than life extension. So longevity has been around for a long time. And those conferences on life, it wasn't life extension per se, but it was everything dealing with how to stay alive, how to protect our identity, our personhood, what to be mindful of with AI and nanotech and gray goo and any type of art-elect and AI going awry. Those were the topics of discussion, and they were quite marvelous. And I loved those days. So that was wonderful, but we got too much publicity. In Wired magazine several times, you know, all over the place, covered. I remember I'd be on a TV show and they plant someone in the audience to make me look like a fool, you know? And then, I mean, it's like journalists, I was on the cover of the LA Weekly, and the journalist who was featuring me for the LA Weekly came to a talk I was giving at MGM on the future, and I was showing my future body design, Prima Posthuman, which didn't have any clothes on. So he wrote in the LA Weekly, "Oh, she showed her naked body." I'm like, what? It's like, it was just, the media got really mean, and they would say things that were really mean and kind of discredit key thinkers, and it was uncomfortable. But then it got really uncomfortable. More towards the middle of the 1990s, the politics entered, where politics weren't that important. I was a Green, and we will talk about that, and I ran for office, but it was just another form of expression. But there were some really hard-nosed, political, hegemonic, biased individuals that came into transhumanism and would push their views, capital L libertarian, capital S socialist. So it became this name-calling thing, and I didn't like it at all. It was very uncomfortable to me because I wasn't either right or left. I followed FM 2030's view. I'm an upwinger. You know, I'm up neither right nor left, and I looked at it even beyond FM's view of it. I thought we should vote on issues, not on people, not on parties, but on ideas and how to move policy forward for legislation and regulation and laws for a transhumanist future. But there was just a few people, a handful of people that got really nasty. So that caused some rivalry and name calling, which I did not like at all. And I even created a new transhumanist organization, the Colloquium. And I had it like Roman pillars, and it was a place for people to come together and say, okay, why is there this run? We're a small group of people. Why is this going on? Well, there are various reasons why it was going on. People have their agendas. I would say on one side, there was, I don't want to say who the people are because I don't think that's fair in hindsight or retrospect, but there were a couple of very strong people, very far right, and a couple of very strong people, very far left, and they really hated each other. And I never understood it because I saw things I didn't like and things I liked in them personally, but I was very uncomfortable. And then, so finally we got over that. But before we got over that, what happened that kind of put that at bay? It's kind of like a family fighting over who gets the dessert or something like this. It was really looking pretty silly. the President George W. Bush's bioethics committee or council, and Francis Fukuyama, Leon Kass, and William Holbert, they started attacking transhumanism. So this is towards the late 1990s, going into the early 21st century. And that Beyond Therapy report came out. And then we knew the world was taking us seriously, and Leon Kass called transhumanism the world's most dangerous idea. And there was a moratorium put on stem cells. And our dear friend Michael West, who was one of the key scientists in stem cells on the East Coast at that time, had to stop. And it was just lots of stories there on trying to save a dear friend's life, who was probably the most well-known person in life extension in the world, had ALS and was dying. We were trying to save his life with stem cells. And it was a very difficult time, but we had gotten out of the trenches, and then we faced the reality that we've gone mainstream. And now we have to deal with the big names that are so biased. Talk about bias and racist. They were racist against transhumanists because it didn't fit their particular moral view, not ethics, their moral agenda that they took into their bioethics committee. And I found that very disheartening, because these bioethicists largely, not completely, but largely, were proposing their moral agenda, their moral beliefs onto making laws and policies. And I found that it put my teeth on edge, because it was so unjust and unright. And I felt like I was back in having to fight as a woman to, get equal grades as the guys. So it was just really frustrating to me. But I chaired a conference, and here we're going into the 21st century in 2004, called the Vital Progress Summit. And we took on the Beyond Therapy report. And it was the first online summit ever anywhere in the world. And our speakers, everyone was a keynote. It was, of course, Ray Kurzweil and Martine Rothblatt and Anders Sandberg and Max Moore, myself, and Christine Peterson. And we had a really tight group of people. And my question I asked each of us to participate: how will we deal with the Beyond Therapy report? What can we come up with under the rubric and the tenor of Progress Action Coalition? And that's what I had been working on. And so we came up with a proactionary principle written by Max. He took everything and we pulled it together. But it was really wonderful, because everyone who participated in that online summit, their ideas were included, and Max pulled it together beautifully. And I think that the proactionary principle beautifully and arguably wrestles with the precautionary principle, which had been used historically in decision-making, which is totally unfair. Again, it's based on biases and moral views rather than the facts as they lay before us, and how to discern between best policies and best practices in decision-making.
Yes, indeed. And I remember that period of time, because that was when I was beginning to get into transhumanism, and I saw what the President's Council on Bioethics was doing. And even at the time, it seemed morally abhorrent to me, because here they were shutting down an entire area of research, embryonic stem cell research, without at all really caring about the life-saving possibilities. Those embryos were being discarded outright. Right. And there was this, it seemed to me at the time, small but heroic group of transhumanists standing up to these kinds of decisions and formulating an alternative ethical framework via the proactionary principle that really addressed a lot of these reservations and put forward an approach that I think, had it been more widely adopted, we wouldn't have had all of these deaths from COVID-19 either, because the proactionary principle with regard to vaccines would have recognized, well, Moderna had its vaccine developed back in January of last year. And what are the potential risks of the side effects from the vaccine versus the risks of not approving it, doing nothing? We know what that downside was. 350,000 people have died in the United States alone. What could have happened if they had followed the proactionary principle with regard to the vaccines? It just seems these ideas that were formulated then are becoming increasingly relevant today.
Yes. And along those lines, there was the assumption. Here, I just went out of focus now, back in. There is the assumption that women would get pregnant and abort their embryos to make money, and who's on this council? All men. And that was another thing that it's just enough is enough. And I'm not a feminist. I was, but I'm beyond it. I'm a transhumanist, and I simply do not like that, where presupposing someone is going to do the unkind or immoral thing because based on your morality. And of course there's a black market, and there could have been a black market, but I agree with you, the lives were saved. The other thing I wanted to mention from what you said, Gennady, is that interestingly enough, Michael West was a high proponent of embryonic stem cells, but he's changed his tune. He now thinks that non-embryonic stem cells are the more pure form of stem cells. So it's interesting how things change over time. And this ties into how we all need to keep on re-educating, relearning that things do change. What we thought was the best policy or the best option for success, we find that things change around it within the system, the variables change. And so then the best solution in finding the proactionary solution is based on different variables because of the constant change.
Yes, and one of the big changes that took place was in 2007 when induced pluripotent stem cells were discovered. So scientists figured out a way to take adult cells and differentiate them back into essentially the equivalent of embryonic stem cells without extracting them from an embryo. So you're right, the scientific and technological realities will set the parameters for what good decisions would be in the realm of policy. It's interesting too, in our chat, Brent Green said that he misses the optimism of the 1990s. And yet you characterize the 1990s also as a decade where you faced a lot of resistance. I remember that time. I was a child, but I remember a certain view of technological progress that unfortunately is missing today from the general culture. I remember in middle school hearing that, of course, cancer will be cured in 15 years, for example. And here we are more than 20 years later, and cancer is still a widespread problem. But it seemed that for a lot of people prior to September 11th, prior to all of the economic crises that we faced since that time, that the trajectory for the future more generally was bright. What do you think led that to change, and how can we get some of that general cultural optimism back?
Getting into 2021 first, we all have a heck of a hard time in 2020. I mean, everyone has their own story, and it's all relative to be sure, but we all know that each one of us in our different situations had a tough time. I think that seeing games, number one, be not about fighting and war, but about mental agility and maybe physical agility in virtual environments or augmented reality. I think that the game industry, because it is so large and it is growing, could be beneficial if it became more, not Pollyanna, but more challenging as far as learning and growing and achieving, and looking at maybe going back to Buckminster Fuller's role game plan and pulling that into some type of interfaces or challenges, whether it be at a conference or whatever, where we take a look at what was the premise that Buckminster Fuller came up with for the economic structure of the world with supply and demand, and making sure that there was a fluid channel of distribution of products to people in need, and again, the supply and demand. I think that would be really interesting to realize Buckminster Fuller's world game plan as some doable, workable system. Another thing is probably getting as far away from some of the meanness of people, and I think we all need to be mindful to not put up with people that we know that are being dishonest or exaggerating what they do or what they are offering. And I think that it's almost a responsibility to do that, because we all know in this growing community, there's a lot of stuff going on that we're not proud of. We miss the horrible situation with a company in Silicon Valley. I think you all know who I'm talking about. And I was in San Francisco. It's still in the courts, but why wasn't that discussed amongst transhumanists? It was right there in front of everyone's face. And it really put a cloud on entrepreneurs coming up with new solutions to biotechnology. And this, of course, is the blood theramos. So why didn't we talk about that? Why wasn't it discussed? Why didn't we all sit down and go, wait a minute, let's not allow that. Another thing is in exaggeration of maybe skills and qualifications. I've noticed recently people putting on their LinkedIn page qualifications, and I'll check on it and I see it's not there. So I think that you don't want to point a finger and you don't want to shine a light on anyone that is doing this, because that would not be a nice thing to do. But I think that we can set an example of being very forthright and honest about what we know and what we don't know. And there's nothing wrong with saying that's out of my area of expertise. I don't know. I wasn't there. I can offer opinion, but my opinion is just simply my opinion. And when we have products in the marketplace that we're trying to push, especially in the longevity industry, think about the reputation of the industry as it's tied to transhumanism, because transhumanism is longevity. There is no other movement that's about longevity or life extension. So I think that we need to be wise, and I'm still learning myself how to be more effective in when I'm giving talks about it, to say that it's best to maybe be conservative in certain areas and more aggressive in other areas based on your own particular genome and your particular age and your status and where you live and all these things. That pushing longevity or life extension for everyone is great, but I think we need to be a little bit more authentic in that regard. And also, if people are dying, let's just let them die. Let's not shame them. I think that I noticed a tendency over the past couple of years of when someone's died, they didn't want to live enough, so they die. And it's kind of like that cancer thing from the 60s or 70s. I think it's 70s. If you had cancer, you were a negative thinker. So it was shaming people who had cancer. So I remember in the 70s, you never talked about it. And if you did, they have cancer, they're a negative thinker. But we know now that there are some genes, it's hereditary in part. It's also based on the environment, based on your immune system. There's so many variables that negative thinking is not good for one's immune system, but, shaming people that aren't pushing anti-death, I think is unkind. People do die, and if they die, let's not shame them or shame anyone who goes to their funeral. So that's another area. Outside of that, I think that we need more education, and I'll announce it now. And I think this is an area where we can all work more cohesively together. Transhumanist Studies is launching in February, and the domains have already been secured. The coursework has already been written. The books are already done. And so that will launch, and I hope that it will provide not only a history of the transhumanist movement, some of the different ideas, some of the problems with it, which, again, you don't want to look in a closet, but I think we do need to look in the closet, because that's a sign of intelligence to admit your mistakes, and to offer options to people of how they can better align with learning about how to be positive. And here this gets back to your question, Janati. Sorry, I took a little detour there, but we can't help it that all of us have had a hard time in 2021. It is what it is. But complaining about it and is a ridiculous thing. Blaming it on a political party or candidate is a waste of time. And I'm so sick of, I had to remove friends from Facebook because they kept on criticizing one party or the other party. And to me, that's going down a slippery slope. It's not only a slippery slope, but it's a darn red herring. And it's taking us away from the real issue at hand. And the real issue at hand is, what are we doing wrong? So then we get into the bigger issue of becoming a more humane humanity. And so I think that would answer your question, Gennady. How do we do this? How do we get back to the 1990s where we had this zest and wonder for technology in the future? Not Pollyanna, not utopia. And too many people use the term utopia. I never saw anything that was done in the 1990s as utopia. In fact, I thought it was all very basic common sense and logical and well thought out. Utopia is where you're dreaming off in the sunset with rose-colored glasses, and everyone's going to live forever, and we just have to wish it, and so it's going to happen. That's more utopia. I think the more transhumanist perspective in the rationale is, we've got problems. What are they? Let's deal with them. And you said, put it on the table. What is your truth? I don't know if David or you said this, Gennady, but what is each one's truth? And you can't be wrong in your truth. It's like your morals. Your morals are not wrong. They're your morals. But we can agree to the continuity of our truth in developing a more humane humanity. So I think we all need to stay pretty upbeat and keep pushing forward. Just keep on pushing. So then that begs the question: how do we become a real recognized segment of society rather than outliers? And even though we've grown enormously over the years, we're still outliers. And I'd rather be, in the in team, frankly. I'd rather be on the, not the winning or losing bench, but in the bench where, the cheering forward and moving it forward. And I think that Peter Diamandis does a darn good job of that with the X Prize. And I love his positiveness. I love his Murphy's Law statements and his quotes. I keep them by my desk. So not all of us have the money or the intelligence and the connections of Peter Diamandis, but we can, through our network, create something, I think, as on par, as present, as powerful, as worthy, and as knowledge sharing sources. So I think that's something that we could do.
Yes, thank you, Natasha. And our friend Jose Cordero, who is the vice chair of Humanity Plus, asks the following question. Natasha, how do you compare the futuristic and transhumanist ideas of the early 1980s with those today in the 2020s? And you talked a bit about that via the evolution of the Transhumanist Manifesto. You've also mentioned that the movement has grown significantly. Do you see any qualitative shifts between then and now? Or do you think the core has been essentially consistent, but it's just manifesting itself on a bigger scale, perhaps embroiled in a messier world than existed back then?
Well, it's interesting because Jose prefaces his question with the futurist. Now, I think that that's really important. So I'm going to pick up on that and then move in your direction, Gennady, here. The well-known futurist Alvin Toffler was very present in the 1980s. I went to several of his cocktail parties in Santa Monica. He was the futurist, and everyone remembers Future Shock. In fact, there's a book that just came out recently, Future Shock 2030 or something. What was it? I wasn't invited to write for it, and I was very disappointed because I knew him, but no one knew that. So, but it's like, I'm a futurist. Why wasn't I included? But I didn't, I'm just teasing here. Really great ideas, but I think that it'd be challenging for us to work on something on a similar note, because Alvin Toffler did write about Future Shock. But he wasn't extremely pessimistic about it. He was more a logician. He was very logical and rational about it, and just was offering what could be out there. But if we look at it today, it was pretty uneventful. It wasn't that Future Shock. I think that probably Huxley with Brave New World was more shocking than Future Shock. And then the second part of that I was going to answer for Jose is that also around that time was John Nesbitt. So it's like Alvin Toffler, the world's leading futurist, was then John Nesbitt came alongside with his Megatrends. And if you all remember the book Megatrends, that was a big hit in the 80s? And Megatrends, no, 1990s, I guess. Megatrends sold millions and millions of copies, more so than Future Shock. And Megatrends was translated into languages around the world. I mean, it was, and John Nesbitt became very much the image of the future. And what a sweetheart of a man he was. He was a very, very dear friend of mine. And he adored the idea of transhumanism. In fact, for FM 2030's book, Are You a Transhuman? I put on an event for the book in Telluride, where I had lived, and John Nesbitt owned a house, a winter house there. And John came and bought several copies of FM's book, and it was lovely. Then I found out later that John was a student of FM's at the New School of Social Research in New York City some years ago. And there was a little bit of rivalry there, but it was a sweet rivalry. It was just a lovely tone. They were both exuberant and handsome and charismatic men. John Nesbitt is with Megatrends. He tried several books after that. Soft Touch, hard tech, soft touch. It was okay, but I think he's best known for Megatrends. In any case, both Toffler and Nesbitt, very well-known international futurists, knew of transhumanism, but it was not their thing. It was just simply, John was not interested. He was a Mormon, nothing wrong with that. And we know we have a Transhumanist Mormon Society, which is very interested in longevity and supports it 100%, but it wasn't John's thing, nor was it Al Toffler's thing. So looking at that time in the 1980s, 1990s, I would say that the tonality of futurists and transhumanism has gone through this type of postmodernist wrestle. And futurists largely are postmodernists. And and Jose and I experienced this, and I'll mention it because it's unabashedly, it's, let's put all of our truth on the table here. Derek Woodgate should be at the YouTube. He's a futurist, very well known. I met him in Austin, Texas. He's a world-known futurist. He interviewed me for UNESCO's most recent event that was put on a couple of weeks ago. I did, I think, an hour-long interview with him. It was really wonderful. And then 2 days later, I was on a panel with Aubrey on the future of death, I think it was, which was so disappointing. It was, it was an embarrassment. And so you have people like Derek Woodgate and Jose and myself who understand transhumanism and understand the possibilities of AI and nanotechnology, genetic engineering, genomics, space exploration, all, digitality, avatars, virtual reality, augmented reality, everything that's possible there to create these futures that can be a lot of fun and exciting and exhilarating. And then you have the ones that are like, oh, no, you can't do that because there's people suffering over here. Oh, no, you can't do that because you're white and you're an elitist. Oh, you better not. No, you don't have. Who do you think you are to live longer? So you have that segment too. And I had to face that, and Jose did too at this recent UNESCO. And I don't know if Jose wrote to anyone that he dealt with, but I certainly did. I wasn't going to let that go because I was insulted by two of the panelists for being white. And not directly in that way, but you have to be careful with this because they don't have to say it directly, but they'll use their postmodernist rhetoric to get around it, to try to make you into a fool. And I just sat there and listened, and I fell for it. I was so stupid. I felt naive. I fell for it first because I thought they were better people at UNESCO. I mean, this is UNESCO. They don't do that. No, they do it. So I did complain to the producer of the session I was in, and I said it was non-intelligent, and I was ashamed to be a part of it, that it wasn't what Huxley created when he first headed up UNESCO. It was for diversity, sharing knowledge and fairness, and education, nothing to do with bias. And so it's the table turns. So the whole bottom line here is we can't let these groups of people that are using their political sword to put our teeth on edge. We have to not do that. Can't let them do it. I'm not ashamed of being a woman. I'm not ashamed of my education. I'm not ashamed of the fact that I want to live a very long time, if not indefinitely. That's my choice. That's my view. And I'm certainly not ashamed that I worked my butt off to get my degrees and to start my businesses and to do everything I've succeeded at. I'm not ashamed of that. And nor was I privileged to do that. I worked hard. I worked as a waitress. I worked as a paralegal for years. So I think that we have to own that. But how to do that? Now, I'm not the most eloquent person. So I think that, we need almost a vocabulary and a phrasing to not let these people do this to us that Jose and I both experienced in 2 different sessions. Because if we're experiencing it at UNESCO, it's going to start hitting the mainstream, and we may see that it does affect us as transhumanists, much like, if I can create an analogy, much like Bush's bioethics committee did with the Beyond Therapy report. So it's better to be prepared, and if we have to be prepared with our response and how we're going to verbalize it, to take on the offense rather than the defense. With a level of kindness and sincerity, I think we need to be prepared. Hopefully we won't have to, but we need to be prepared.
Yes, thank you, Natasha. And these are quite important remarks. By the way, our friend Jose wanted to come into this session and say a few words, so I sent him the link to join. Perhaps you will see it in time, but I would be quite interested in his perspective on the matters you discussed as well, especially since you answered his question so eloquently. And I suppose the only aspect I would disagree with you on is your statement about your own eloquence. A lot of people in the chat have said that you are quite an eloquent speaker, and they are impressed by your remarks. And I really think you get at the crux of a lot of the issues we face, and this postmodernist identity politics has been perhaps the force that has been most staunchly opposed to transhumanism in recent decades. We can get even a lot of the conservative right and the religious right on board, because most of those people are fine with living longer. They're fine with doing good works to help people. Indeed, for some of them, their religions teach them that that is their mission. We can get a lot of the old left on board because they're also primarily concerned about material standards of living and how to improve life for ordinary people, and certainly transhumanism can do that. But when the discussion shifts from how do we improve human well-being to who are you, what skin color are you, what gender are you, what national origin are you, what sexual orientation are you cisgender, transgender, whatnot, then it stops being about the content of a person's ideas. It starts being about circumstantial attributes, sometimes ones over which a person has no control. And I completely agree with you. When any of us is characterized as privileged, that just shows the ignorance of the person doing the characterization, because they might see what we are now, what we've accomplished, but they don't see all of what it took to get there. And certainly you described your path, and it wasn't always an easy path. And I could have stories about my path, and I think everyone on this meeting would have stories to share, different experiences from different people, but we've all had challenges to overcome. And I think that's very important to recognize. And instead of focusing on these very superficial attributes, people really need to focus on the content of what someone is saying and what someone is trying to do in their work.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Gennady. If I can add just one point to what Natasha was saying, I think this is a very critical discussion we need to be having as transhumanists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and remember.
Yeah, and I sense it. It's almost like I can, you can smell the rain before it comes. There's a certain smell in the air, or there's a certain lighting. I can sense it coming, and just having been there before, it's like, we better be prepared and be
right. Yes, indeed. We have to remember that if we're being attacked, it shows we're on the right track.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we must also remember this, that the end goal of transhumanism isn't fame or notoriety, it's improving the human condition. The best offense is a good offense, and the best defense is a good offense.
Yeah, the best defense is a transhumanist offense.
That's right.
Yeah,
right,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear about what happened after this panel. I did see Jose Cordiero's talk that he gave at UNESCO, and I thought it was brilliant. And he laid it all. He laid it all out there. But I may have not pushed the vision quite so far, but I commend him for being bold and, you know, laying out the possibilities of radical life extension. I think, like, broadly speaking, this whole conversation and history you've given has been fascinating, because we see that we're entering sort of a new era now where the opposition is not coming from the religious right, it's coming from a different direction. And what I'm finding personally is the pushback is more from the angle of people worried about inequality, or mischaracterizing the movement as being what a selfish power play by a certain, white male Silicon Valley elite, which is really a complete mischaracterization of transhumanism. Now, there are a lot of movements, a lot of the thinkers are white, but that is really irrelevant. It's really a historical happenstance that led to that. And if you look, and it's very frustrating, because we are doing all this amazing work in Africa right now, and a lot of the most exuberant transhumanists we know are in Africa and all over the world. And I think we should be going on the offensive and kind of anticipating that this backlash is going to grow, actually. That people are going to try to misbrand mischaracterize the movement. So yeah, it's an important points you bring up.
Yes, and I also want to echo that, Dan. We have made so many great contacts with African philosophers, educators who strongly identify as transhumanists. People like Osinakachi Akuma Kalu, Ugochukwu Chukwu, Kelvin Ogbadafia-Gore, and various others who have been able to come into this transhumanist world because of these technologies of telepresence, as FM 2030 would characterize them, which we are engaged in right now. And all of these old geographical boundaries, which may have led to a certain composition of the movement, are now being eroded. I think in 5 years and 10 years, we're going to have an immense amount more diversity in the movement. But all of these people, they're looking at these ideas of transhumanism. They're seeing inspiration. They're seeing the potential to improve the situation in their own home countries, which is sometimes a very unpleasant situation. In Nigeria, they're dealing with police brutality to a far greater extent than exists in the United States. And this movement offers them a way out, a way to a better future. So yes, thank you for your remarks. And I really think now is a good time to tackle the next area of our discussion, because it relates to some of the obstacles to progress. Mike Lazine in our YouTube chat said that one of the reasons why some of the optimism of the 1990s hasn't carried over today is partly due to politicians standing in the way for transhumanist progress in a lot of ways. And Natasha, you've spoken a lot about toxic political environments, and you have a history yourself of running for office for Los Angeles City Council in the 1990s. So I'm curious to hear more about that experience. What led you to run? How did you succeed in getting elected? And furthermore, what were the obstacles that you saw firsthand within the political process that perhaps should give us some reasons to see this as a problem area that transhumanists need to overcome?
It's really quite a coup. I hadn't planned on it. In fact, I hadn't even thought about running for office. I was very focused on my TV show and hosting that and getting better at hosting it and studying what I was going to ask the experts so I'd be on their level. And but interestingly enough, someone who was watching my show nominated me on the Green Party ticket. And at that time, it was 1990, I think, or 1991. The Green Party was pretty popular in the west side of Los Angeles, Santa Monica, Marina del Rey, Venice, West Los Angeles, around UCLA. And so I was nominated, and I, went to a park, and I got people to sign, and I got my, on the ticket. And so it was, but I really hadn't thought of it in advance until it came time. I remember Michael Feinstein. He was very well known in Germany as a Green, and he come from a family of Greens, and he was very powerful. He's very well known in the Green politics in Europe. And I said to him, what should I do? And he said, just pick your topic and stick with it. And I thought, okay, I'm a transhumanist. My topic is technology to clean up the environment. So it's on the Green Party ticket, which is an environmental ticket, of course. And because the Green Party pretty much relied on the precautionary principle, it came out of green environmentalists in Europe, in Germany. I thought, okay, this is great. This is a nice fix. I'll talk about nanotechnology, nanotubes, nanosystems for cleaning up oil spills and any type of environmental hazard. I'll talk about health and vitality, looking at the difference between legacy genes and genetic liberation from our legacy genes. I'll talk about ways to use security for identity and the future advances in technology. So I had my platform pretty clear, and because I was on the green ticket, it had to do with the environment. And so I used the transhumanist technologies as my my recipe for delivering what I did give some pretty good talks at the different conventions and events and whatnot. So I was on the ticket and I won by a landslide. I got the most votes. And so I was in the 28th senatorial district for that. And I enjoyed it for a while, but not too long. I stayed in my seat for a year, and then I resigned. And I'll tell you what I experienced. I experienced a lot of people arguing and power play. And I thought, oh my goodness. And we had our meetings downtown Los Angeles at the official building of the political core building downtown LA. And the meetings always went on and on and on, and people disagreeing on everything. There were a lot of parties, a lot of events, but there was no heady conversation. So I was missing the intellectual foray that I was becoming accustomed to. I was missing the creative of solution finding that I was accustomed to. And so it did not suit me. It did not suit me because when I commit to something, I want to see something happen. I want to know what the end goal is, and I want to focus on it, target it, and achieve it. But this was more like playing house and more of like a club than actually getting anything done. So I did resign. And I don't think the Green Party has gained much mileage. I think that was kind of almost the height of the Green Party in the early 90s in Los Angeles. Since then, it hasn't really made any advances or successes. So my experience, my takeaway is know your platform, have a very strong platform, stick with a very few ideas, find out what the temperature of your constituency is, know the demographics of your constituency, and get out there and just, stay the course, repeat it, tell them what you tell them again, tell them again, tell them again. And so that you were identified almost like a logo. They see you and they see that, for me, it was technology to clean the environment, where everyone else was saying we should stop technology, no more technology. In fact, Bill Joy, remember, cover Wired magazine, which was some years later, but it was Why the Future Doesn't Need Us. And that was Bill Joy's salvo to the world about why we need to stop technology, back to, you know, our tribes in our little villages. And I was the opposite of that. But I think that there is a place for transhumanist politics as a platform and sees as a PAC, political action committee. I think that equity, diversity, opportunity is crucial to look at how the technologies, the current we have available, narrow AI certainly, and encryption and cybersecurity, and towards, you know, looking at the future of nanotechnology and you know, strong AI or advances towards that, how it can help us, while also offering concerns, being very forthright about the concerns. Yes, we do have these concerns, we're aware of them, but we're not pretending that they don't exist. And we're not claiming that it's going to ruin humanity. And I think that those two things, on the one hand, be open to it. Yes, there are risks. We're going to apply balanced thinking in problem solving, looking at all issues within the situation, and it's going to change per situation. So it's not one rule or policy that is implemented every time like a cookie cutter stamp. And also that we can't go backwards. We're going forwards. Let's plan it. Let's plan in advance. Let's be smart about it.
Yes, thank you, Natasha, for those insights. And I think any transhumanist candidate in the future should go back and listen to your remarks, because you provided some good advice here, both about campaign tactics as well as a desired rhetorical approach and policy priorities for candidates to follow. It's interesting because I ran twice in 2018 and 2020 for a local office, the Board of Trustees of the Indian Hills General Improvement District in Douglas County, Nevada. And this is a position that essentially oversees the water system, the sewer system, road maintenance, parks. So fairly routine types of activities. I noticed, though, that there's kind of a disconnect between what the people who are involved in this area can hear and the messages that they can receive and the general public. So for example, I would go to the board meetings, I would make public comments, I would ask questions. And it was interesting because the board had a very favorable view of me, as did the relatively few people who attended those meetings, because I was able to engage with them intelligently, and I would bring in science and technology where I could. The issue was, for whatever reason, a lot of people in that area, perhaps they're senior citizens or they don't pay attention to the same media that you or I would, they were not aware of these goings on. So when we had video recorded town halls, or when there were online articles or events, perhaps 100 people would know about them. And incidentally, those people were the ones more likely to vote for me. And the thousands of others in that district, they got their information through some other ways. It's like they weren't on the internet, they weren't on social media, they were somewhere else. So do you also see that there's a large fraction of the population that is still like that? I hate to bring in a very old 1990s term, but the digital divide. Do you still think there's a digital divide, and does it affect politics?
Yes, it's so interesting because for the past few years I've been teaching ethics, and part of the ethics when we create debates, moral debates, and dilemmas, moral dilemmas, also talked about what different divides there are, and digital divide was one of the divides, and yes, it still does exist. What's interesting, the demographics that you suggested, the elderly or the people that use different mechanisms for gaining knowledge or reading the news or whatever, most of my students don't read the news, they don't watch TV, they don't listen to radio. And I would ask them, where do you get your information? They get their information from social platforms, social networking platforms. And we know how information is skewed on those platforms, and it's more opinion than news. And that is pretty darn scary, because they're just repeating what they heard, and then it becomes popular what's in, and then you parrot that, and that's in, and that's important, and then you like or dislike or whatever. And so that's that's a concern that I have, and I think it's something that we need to take seriously. Even when I go to the park, take our dogs to the park, and I talk to people at the park, and just say hello, whatever. I would say every single person at the park that I communicate with, and that's probably about 10 people, not on a daily basis, but people that I like and I say hi to, and just, what are you doing? How are you doing? At a distance. Most of them know nothing about nanotechnology or genetic engineering or life extension or encryption or cybersecurity, have very little information about what's really going on in the world. But what they are parroting is, I've heard a lot of and environmental issues. It's the end of the world's going to end, it's all terrible, there's no future. And it's almost like people are being browbeated into saying something that is socially acceptable, and you dare not say the other thing. This goes into our previous conversation on how we're going to develop we almost need a playbook on phrasing and addressing and what, how to weave our way or this trek through the muddy waters and quicksand of the next few years. I think that if more people paid attention to Peter Diamandis, it would be good. I know Elon Musk, I like him a lot. I spent about a week just watching his YouTube videos, interviews and whatnot. And he first comes out as more like Stephen Hawking, that, the group of the Future of Life Institute. It's kind of like cookie cutter thinking from the same mold. And it's very existential risk, whatnot. And now he's become quite transhumanist. He's saying, oh, this, neural link, and we've got to start thinking about this, and there is a future, and let's start working on it. I'm going, wow, what happened? What was that switch in his brain that got him away from it's popular, it's cool to be part of, existential risk. And it's important to know about existential risk. There's no question, but that's not going to solve the problem. That's just repeating everything that we've already talked about for years, since the 1990s, that there are risks out there, that AI, it's nothing new, could cause existential risk to humanity. And the most recent alarm is that AI is going to change our humanity. Well, I hope it does, but you can't say that in such phrasing. It has to be, well, yes, it will, but that could be a good thing. It's almost like you have to, the dynamics of how you say it is important. So even though we do want to evolve past being human in our reptilian brain and our greed and envy and all those 7 deadly sins and some of the things that we know is not healthy about our species, especially our limited lifespan, we dare not say, let's kill off humans and become more. It's that fine line there of assuaging our terminology.
Yes, of course. And last weekend, we spoke about this with Francesco Neo-Amati, and we discussed how transhumanism is about keeping and enhancing the best parts of humanity and only setting aside or overcoming the deleterious aspects, the limitations, and the people who take it further than that and kind of devolve into a hatred of humanity have the wrong idea about what transhumanism is. It's almost like they're taking the mirror image of the critics of transhumanism who say, well, you're against what it means to be human. And then they say, well, if that's what you think transhumanism is, then yes, I'm against what it means to be human. But in fact, that is not what transhumanism is. And I think, yes, we need to emphasize that balance between keeping and developing our humanity and getting rid of the troublesome parts of human nature that have held us back.
Right.
Yes. So that's very important. And also, it's interesting, you mentioned one-on-one interactions with people and how sometimes that elicits different responses. In my one-on-one interactions, generally, I don't see that much hostility toward transhumanism. About 50% of the people I speak to have a kind of lukewarm acceptance, and then the other 50% may have some reservations, mild skepticism. You can generally talk to them about it, and the conversation will not become heated, except if they're hard right-wing or hard left-wing. Then they start getting upset and defensive. But you're correct that I think sometimes people make these dystopian statements or interpretations of the world because that is more socially acceptable these days. That's kind of the zeitgeist of the general culture. And I think shifting that toward a more techno-optimistic point of view, even back to what it was in the 1950s, the golden age of science fiction, would help a great deal.
Mm.
You know, it's
Yeah, as long as the women aren't barefoot in the kitchen.
Oh, sure. There has been a lot of progress since that time that we should not discount or reverse in any way, shape, or form. But go ahead, Tom.
Just that it's interesting, you know, the assumption is transhumanism is progressing toward the future, towards cyborgs, and it's going toward post-humanism. But in a real way, transhumanism is also going back to prior to the industrial age. We need to remember what those uniquely human skill sets were that we had before we were mechanized into the industrial age. And so that's a big topic I talk about a lot, to alleviate the fear of AI, to see it more as augmenting us and giving us the opportunity to remember what it was like to be human.
Yeah,
That was big. That was a big push in the magazine we did with TAFs, was bringing out more of the human, the poetry, the photography, and things like that, because we have really forgotten what it means, what our really uniquely human skill sets are, and transhumanism in a way is bringing those things back by encouraging AI and automation and these trends. We are allowing us to remember the less repetitive nature of being. And talking about the digital divide that you brought up, this brought me back to thinking about Jose's question. And I think what we are experiencing now, and why there's kind of a less enthusiasm about the future, is because megatrends, which I read in '82 in high school, so it was from the '80s, those happened. Everything happened that he predicted. From the VCR bringing everybody into the home, but the high touch, meaning that we would have to still want to go to theaters. So everything that he predicted in that book happened. And so now there's kind of an entropy of excitement for the future, because those of us who grew up in the analog world, who had analog childhoods and are in that transition towards the digital future, these trends have happened. And the younger generation today who are of this, the digital natives who are of this new world, they may have a whole different mindset about what the future is. And so that's a big part of my work, is focusing on what these digital natives are excited about, and mining their ideas for solutions to some very existential problems. And so I think that's where we're at. It's kind of we analog types, the Gen X and above. We're excited because these things were so brand new, but they all happened. And now we are living in that world. And so once you get to that destination, you're a little, there's a little lag time. And now what do we imagine? And there's this entropy of the future now, because there's so many possibilities. And again, back to transhumanism, I think is the most rational movement. And that's what attracted me to it myself, was that I read through the Constitution, and it had very specific ideas about very real issues that my children, and my children's children will be facing. And none of the other parties were handling any of this stuff. They were kind of in this fog of the old world, the old paradigm. So I don't know, I feel like I'm a middle child, of civilization right now. We have analog childhoods and digital adulthoods, and we're in this lacuna between them. And so that all of my focus is on my kids. What are they interested in? And picking up from them what is the most relevant field of study or subjects that I should be interested in.
Yes, this is very interesting Tom, because I essentially belong to the last age cohort that saw the analog world. Essentially, anybody who is younger than me is a digital native. But I have a bit of an interesting history. I don't quite identify as a millennial because I have a different origin story. And in some ways, I've experienced what the analog world was like because I was born in the former Soviet Union. And I remember as a child seeing a newspaper headline to the effect of why is Russia behind the United States by 63 years? And probably 63 years was an arbitrary number that the author concocted, but he was speaking to some very real phenomena. For example, as a child, I had vinyl records, and I lived in the city of Minsk, in the center of the city, which was considered the most technologically developed area, but we had color television, whereas people in the rural areas only had black and white television. When my father came over from the United States the first time, he brought a computer, a PC, and we had to keep the PC absolutely secret. When we had guests over, essentially we would close the door to the room where the PC was located, and nobody was allowed to know that we had a PC because somebody would tell somebody, and it was a high crime time period in the early 1990s, and we did not want to get burglarized. So that was the environment I saw as a child. And then coming over to the US, really delving into computers, the internet, the cultures of the internet in the early 2000s, it was essentially like moving forward 70 years in 2 decades, which was quite interesting. But I think a lot of the people who grew up with digital technologies, who see it as second nature, they don't quite understand what the world was like before then. But I know Natasha has dealt with a lot of these people as an educator, as a professor. And so this was one of the areas I was really curious to inquire with her about. Essentially, what are the outlooks of the current young generation? How do they perceive transhumanism and emerging technologies in a way that may be different from those of us who remember the analog reality and who may love these digital technologies, just as I loved computer games. I enjoyed being on the internet, using it for constructive purposes, of course. But how does that world look to people who haven't known anything other than that?
My students would range from, say, 19 to 30 for undergrad, and anywhere between 25 and 40 and up to grad school. And it was an interesting array of ideas and views and demographics for students. The red thread between all these different age groups was that they largely grew up in the digital environment and were accustomed to it. Mind you, if they were on the edge of digital analog, they were at a computer science school, a game school, a school of cybersecurity. So they were in a specialized university specifically designed for their intellectual acumen and skill base to be high-end techies. So with that in mind, here are some of the things I noticed. A lack of awareness about longevity, a lack of interest in longevity, except for maybe every semester I would get a few students who were really interested in life extension, but a few. But that makes sense because they were younger. You don't think about it in your 19, 20. Maybe after 40 you start thinking about it, or you think about it earlier if you've had to struggle with a disease or injury, but it's usually not on your radar at that age. More interest in enhancement and augmentation, connecting with augmented reality. And we had a lot of augmented reality and virtual reality and game students. So very, very largely interested in avatars and becoming other type of people, characteristics. But there's a warning sign there, because often what I noticed, and not always, but often amongst very serious gamers or tech heads interested in avatars, is a personality issue of identity and not enough rigor or information or coursework in the psychology of digitality or digital identity. So I did design the curriculum for a course and wrote the course structure for digital identity to address these issues. And that was kind of fun. But I would say that a misplacement of some students, it wasn't large, it was very rare, but I did notice it, students who became characters of games that they were playing and dressed like them and coming to class dressed like a character in a game. And that was alarming to me. And I tried not to raise my eyebrows and I tried not to react, but I have to tell you, it was alarming. But, you know, you could take back the hippie days or the hippie days, you can see, you know, people trying to look like John Lennon or trying to look like, you know, Yoko Ono. So, I mean, we see this, people become who they're watching and interacting with when they don't have a strong identity. Not so much a fear about the future of identity, but more fear of cybersecurity, because there's a strong level and a high level of knowledge and information about how vulnerable we all are anytime we turn on and use any device. You're automatically, the nanosecond you go online on any device, any system, you're vulnerable. You could be attacked through any different modality or virus. So the students are more aware of that than anything. Some are very concerned about it, others not so much. But the most concerned students were my favorite students. They were in cybersecurity, and I would be the judge of their different red team, blue team events in the cybersecurity battles, which was very exciting and I loved. And I learned a lot from those students. The other students who were deeply embedded in social media were more getting their information and a little bit negative. I noticed that those students were afraid a bit because they're so stuck on social media that was their influencing information and a lot of it negative. In teaching in this sector, most students wouldn't be looking at me, they'd be looking down at their devices. I found that very distracting and difficult to deal with. But, you know, again, you know, you're serving, they're your customers. You don't say anything because you can't ask your students not to turn on their devices. That's against the school's policies. But I think that it would be helpful if students didn't use their devices in class unless they're in a lab where they have a computer in front of them. And then if they want to go online and do social media, then they're. But in an auditorium, and I was usually lecturing in an auditorium, and to be lecturing and, you know, have anywhere between 20 to 90 students in the auditorium, and they're all looking down like this as you're trying to impart knowledge is difficult. So I found that distracting. But what I also, after I get over the distracting element, then I saw some value in it. And the value is that a lot of students, not all of them, but a lot of students would be listening to me and Googling what I was saying to, number one, get more information, number two, to challenge me. And oh boy, did they love to challenge me. They would try to outsmart me every turn. I would say something about the future of technology or where society's headed, you know. And but here's in, you know, such and such, it says such and such, and I would have to constantly be aware. But it was really wonderful. I enjoyed it very much because then I could go back into my mental library of knowledge and remember all the people I talked to or met with, the different conferences I've been at, and be able to pull up firsthand information. I very seldom referred to someone else's work or writing unless I had read it firsthand or had talked to them firsthand. And that's what I loved about being a scholar, an academic, is that that primary sources for knowledge information is so consequential. Anyone can read someone else's stuff and parrot it. I mean, we have people parroting all over the place, but to actually read it and then call them or text them or email them and say, hey, I read your book. What did you mean by this? Or I'm in town, can I meet with you? People love that. Well, not now, not during COVID, but certainly that was the exciting things when students would challenge me and I'd be able to say, yes, you're right. That's true. Let me rephrase this, or yes, that's good. We added to that. In my ethics courses, students often place their moral system over like in an ethical dilemma, and they got very nervous about it. I said, but in an ethical dilemma, it is your moral that's driving you, because it's a dilemma. Neither situation or any of the situations is not your preferred. So it's an impulse reaction that you're going to take. So that was always good. But I have to say, out of all of them, my love was for the cybersecurity students. I love them, and the video students. I still am friends with students, seeing them go to Los Angeles and making movies. I love it. The game students, great, talented, wonderful, but I always was worried about that because the industry is oversaturated. So there's not that many jobs, but maybe there'll be further opportunities. So I try to introduce new ways that games could help. There could be jobs like in dealing with PTSD or, maybe anxiety disorder. I taught students with Asperger's or autism. I would volunteer for that every year at the university. So I taught a course to those students, and they're a totally different group of scholars or students learning. It's hard to answer your question without saying that I don't know. I would say that they don't care that much about the future, other than they're scared shitless about the environment. And they're even more scared about the environment than they are about cybersecurity or their identity, or they're totally immersed in their games that they're not paying attention. And that I find very concerning. So there is a divide, but I wouldn't call it a digital divide. I call it a consciousness divide, that these young people or these students may not be so interested in longevity. Why should that be? Unless they have a disease or an injury, and that's okay. But we need them to participate in the future as futurists, as practitioners of future studies, and to know how to problem solve and ask questions and be critical thinkers. That's what is missing in this social media opinionated world that we're in.
Yes, thank you for that overview, Natasha. And certainly there are some challenges with this younger generation that we transhumanists would need to overcome in terms of how we communicate to them and how we can reach them with this more techno-optimistic perspective. I'm thinking that the passion of someone like Greta Thunberg, for instance, if it were rechanneled toward longevity advocacy, toward seeing how technologies could positively transform the environment and perhaps mitigate climate change, would be a lot more effective than this very gloom and doom apocalyptic style of rhetoric that unfortunately many young people have fallen for. Arin, I'm wondering if you might be able to share a few insights, since you have this commonality, and I do to a certain extent as well, with the young generation in our love of gaming. So how could that perhaps be used to bridge those divides that Natasha talked about?
Thanks, Johnny. That's just such a great question, because it's been, I'll be honest, it's been a real challenge, because just like in Hollywood, by the way, I am an avid video gamer. I've been playing video games for a long time. I love them, but I have a huge criticism of video games, as I do with the movie industry. They both tend to paint technology as this dark, nefarious, destructive force that threatens to destroy humanity. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. And so I think what games have to do a better job of is staying away from this. I mean, obviously, look, it's always acceptable to talk about the risks of a technology. We have to do this. This is the responsible thing to do. But I think games have got to do a better job of inspiring people who play games to use technology as a force for good. I think one of the great things about Deus Ex Human Revolution is we talked on the last panel, and Francesco said quite correctly, it was sort of a cyber renaissance, right? So it's perfectly acceptable to talk about the risks, but we should also talk about the opportunities. Isn't that fair, right? And I think furthermore, if we can use games, look, here's one of the reasons why Roblox is such a hit. Is such a hit with kids. Why? It allows them to build nearly anything they want. This is the power of technology. That's what we should be doing, inspiring people to build and create new worlds where they can be immersed and better express themselves, especially people. look, not everyone is very extroverted. Some people are quite introverted. Natasha, you talked about having autistic students. And this is such a really powerful way for kids to express themselves, especially kids who find it normally difficult to do so. This can also have tremendous therapeutic implications. So I think what the video game industry has to do a better job of is, and I realize they have to sell games, of course, but they've got to do a better job of helping to create an environment in which kids can create their own environment.
Yes, absolutely. And indeed, there were some great comments in the chat to this effect. Annette Harrison suggested creating video games with more immortal, positive heroes. I will say the U.S. Transhumanist Party is working on this right now with trying to resurrect LEV, the game on longevity escape velocity, but there will be more news about that in the coming months. And Mike Lazine says his nephew is a Minecraft enthusiast, as am I, by the way, because Minecraft is exactly this kind of constructive game. You can set it to creative mode where there are no enemies, there are no obstacles. You can fly around and build things with unlimited materials. And many people have created these elaborate cityscapes that are really just a pleasure to explore. So yes, I think channeling games in that direction would be wonderful. Now, Zach Richardson is very interested, Natasha, in these red team, blue team war games. So he would like you to talk about them in greater detail. What are they like? What is done in the course of these exercises?
Well, the teams are not part of a game, although they could be. That would be really interesting. They're for cybersecurity students to get credit for having participated in challenges. So you'll have a red team and a blue team, and then a white team. The white team can mess you up at any time because they're the judges, but they also can put in little bumps in the road, but you have a challenge to solve problems and get through and find out who is hacking you, how they're hacking you, and how to put up safe walls so they can hack you. But it's a course, and it's a challenge that students have to take that are in cybersecurity. I found it fascinating. I loved it. I don't have time to go into it here, but I think I loved the question because that offers an opportunity to think about what if we could create a game that was like how to hack into someone's identity and how can we protect ourselves, because I think that's going to be one of the biggest political issues in the coming decades, personal identity, and we need laws and legislation on identity as a human right to own our mind, our brains.
Yes, and absolutely those rights issues, especially with regard to digital information, are going to become crucial over time. They already are, with people, for instance, now being able to opt out of the sale of their data via GDPR and the California privacy regulations that passed. And it's interesting now, this is a very helpful tidbit for everyone to know. Many sites, when you go on them now, will ask you whether you accept cookies, tracking cookies on their sites, or whether you want to select which cookies you want to accept. And interestingly enough, if you just click the default option, you're probably going to accept all cookies and you'll be tracked every which way. If you go into the menu where you can set your preferences, all of the extraneous uses of cookies are turned off by default. It's as if they expect you, if you're conscientious enough about privacy, to go click on that option. They think you're probably one of the people who cares enough to not want their information shared. And so they'll set those defaults for you. So always click to configure your preferences. This is what I found out. You will be tracked a lot less online. But privacy, identity, those are such crucial issues. And it does concern me that you've stated a lot of people in the younger generations, they tend to be lost in these avatars, these alternative identities they've created for themselves, which are a lot less stable than a person's real identity. And I've experienced a lot of change over the course of my life, as certainly have you, but I found throughout these episodes of change, what has really enabled me to succeed and overcome difficulties is this very stable, strong core of my identity. I knew from very early childhood who I was, what I stood for, what I valued, what I liked, what I disliked. And I remember as a teenager, I would sign my email, I am Gennady Stolirov II, not sincerely or best regards, but I am Gennady Stoliarov II. I actually got that from Voltaire, who would do the same thing. And it's interesting that sometimes I do see this a lot in contemporary American society. People play around with their identities too much, I would say. And I know I may sound like a conservative old man to some people watching this, but I really think it's better to stay with your core identity and to focus on developing that, expanding that. Sure, it will evolve over time, as I think all of us have experienced, but you have common values that will get you through any crisis and the massive technological transformations that we experience. Now, Natasha, do you think this is an insight that many young people will gain with age and wisdom, or do you think there's more of a fundamental disconnect that has occurred where they're kind of cast adrift in the sea of possibility and they don't have a guiding framework to get them to stick to a core identity?
I have two answers to your question. First, I think they will mature and become wise through experience, just like everyone does, the rest of us who've had to mature and become wise from experience. Second, I think that there's going to be a major shift in the idea of identity. While I do think, and I have always thought, that there is a core identity that needs to be maintained for psychological stability, I think that we're going to have sub-Damians or sub-identities or avatars that are subsets of our main core persona or identity that will coexist in multiple environments. The issue here is not to become fractured, which would be like schizophrenia. You need to keep the identity structured. So with that in mind, I've given this a lot of thought over the years. There has to be, the core identity has to be determined. Is it you, the human? Is it you, the avatar? Is it you, the post-human? Where is it in the evolution that you want that core identity to be placed? And then the sub-identities that could coexist would be linked and feeding information nonstop to the core identity. Now, the reason, I suppose, or the analogy I can make, the reason I came up with this, which was not new, I'm sure millions of other people thought about it, but the analogy would be, as I'm sitting here listening to you and thinking about your question and preparing an answer to it, I'm also thinking of the fact that our website's down. I'm emailing Ryan O'Shea over here, just emailed my husband. I'm thinking about what time it is, what time to go to the gym. Is the gym going to be safe today? Then I'm thinking about, I smell the dinner my husband's been cooking all day. It's a keto diet, paleo dinner, which I'm smelling. I'm thinking about my puppy outside the door, who's a bit annoying. So all these things are going on. At the same time, I'm thinking about what I have to do next week and what I did yesterday, and I'm worried about something that I'm having to deal with. So the bottom line is that even though I'm here 100% with you all, there's still parts of my psyche that are tending to other things, whether part of my conscious mind, my subconscious mind, or my unconscious mind. So we can get Freudian about this. These levels do exist. We know it because each one of us experiences it. But we don't go off over here. We don't go over there, because then we become scattered. And people go, oh, she's scattered, or he's scattered, or he's not thinking straight, because we're being pulled by our mind's thoughts and derailed. Or schizophrenic, to where we can't keep that core identity intact. So, cut to the chase. In my view, the students who have these identity issues, they'll mature through wisdom and experience, just like the rest of us have as we grow older chronologically. And also the world is going to change, so that we're all going to have to learn another thing, not only mental acuity and athleticism and our own cognitive properties, but also mental acuity in our physical ability to adapt to different environments, real time, virtual time, uploading time, downloading time, cross-loading time. And I put this very idea into that 1996 project I did, where I designed and engineered Primo Posthuman, the future human, which is a whole body prosthetic, and the meta brain aspect of that, which would allow a person to upload, download, and cross-load, because I don't think that we're all going to want to upload, and that's the end. I like this environment, but I also want to experience other environments. So we're going to cross-load and move around our identities. However, different environments or substrates we exist within or on or through, we're still going to need that core identity. So we'll all
Yes,
be
indeed.
learning that and experiencing it.
Absolutely. And indeed, it's really important to consider how technological possibilities are going to shape our views of identity and the ease with which we can persist in that core identity, especially with a world of so many distractions where it's difficult sometimes to keep focus. It seems like we all need deliberate mechanisms, deliberate habits that keep us on the right track. Now, I wanted to also ask you with regard to Humanity Plus, what have been some of the recent endeavors of that organization, and what are you looking forward to? I know you had this excellent H Plus Summit in July, which was a wonderful, well-attended virtual summit during the time of the pandemic. It brought a lot of transhumanist thinkers together. What insights have you gained from that, and how can you develop upon that success going forward?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. The H Plus Summit was a huge success, largely because 3,500 people were on our live streaming channel. And our techs were marvelous to work with, an incredible team, and thank goodness they were there for it. That was good. That was good. So peace with that. Moving forward and looking back, our focus has been on AI for the past few years. We have been donors and benefactors and grantors to the advances in AI and consciousness studies. We have been supportive and encouraged and donated to Girls Can Code in Africa. We continue to do that. That's one of our major projects. We also support a student at MIT and Harvard in AI. We've worked with the robot Sophia in donating to the advancement of the programming of Sophia to include empathy. So all that AI sector of Humanity Plus, I think, is top notch and leading the way, and shows an incredible aptitude in understanding the importance of AI, the concerns of AI, and why we need to pay attention to areas of the world where people need basic skills, especially women. So I really love the Girls Can Code. Those are some areas that we've donated to. Other areas that we've continued to work on, we put at bay for a little while, because one thing I've noticed, there's so many summits online, so many events online, it's pulling people in all sorts of directions. So I decided that after the H Plus Summit, with our huge success, we should just hold still a little bit, just stay the course with the AI benefits, and regroup and rethink about some things. The focus, the initiatives that I think are most important, is to continue to engage the research and development production of life-saving measures that are backed by evidence-based science rather than personal gain and overzealous advertising. I mentioned that. I've seen too much of it, especially with so many conferences on longevity and the longevity industry, life extension industry growing as one of the largest fundraising areas. Big money is looking at investing in. They want their returns, so pushing that quickly and marketing it, and maybe professing to have done things that have yet to be done. And again, I'm going to mention Elizabeth Holmes. We need to be mindful that that does happen, and it's a tragic thing that what Elizabeth Holmes' business and the people she pulled the wool over. But I think we need to know that does happen, and it does happen. So we need to be careful. I've gone to a number of doctors with my own issues that have tried to push stem cells on me that I know were not what I needed. So behind the scenes, you just have to be careful. Know what your body needs. Know what you need, and look at all sides and go to several doctors. Don't just take the first. Hey, let's fix it with this, or let's fix it with that. So I think that's really important for Humanity Plus to perpetually offer information in that regard. So that's engage the research, develop production of life-saving measures, and provide ample information and assist with critical thinking. Provide awareness of how AI is developing, and I already mentioned that, but I think even looking at that more rigorously, why we need to think about existential risk but not be frightened by it, why we need to be separate than the Future of Life Institute, but more aligned with perhaps the Future of Humanity Institute, more aligned with not the Foresight Institute, but perhaps the Institute for Art and Ideas out of the UK, which is one of the most incredible institutes. They put on amazing conferences with thousands and thousands of people that are dealing with all areas of technology, sciences, the arts, and the future. I was a keynote at it over in 2020. People like Daniel Dennett, Bianca Jagger, they have an incredible array of talent. So that's really exciting. So align with thinkers that are not so much the same as us, but there's this give and shake. So I've been trying to expand Humanity Plus's our connections with some of these groups. Another one is out of Europe. It's called the Center for Big Innovation. I'm now one of their on the board of their innovators, and they work with Parliament. And they're aligned with the All Parliamentary Party, if you all know what that is. And certainly Jose will know what that is. And really smart politicians, academics, scholars, scientists, economists, futurists. And so I am working with them, and so will Humanity Plus. So that's really great. So I'm looking at a broader spectrum. And within that, to help people be critical thinkers rather than Pollyanna thinkers. And I think the third area for the initiative that I really am focusing on is an advocate for equity and offer ways for people to achieve success, like Girls Can Code or affiliate with schools. So we've taken on more students over the past year working with Humanity Plus. We have a scholar from Sweden who was working on our master's in anthropology. The topic was transhumanism, and yours truly. Other students, masters, PhDs, even high school students and undergrad students working on transhumanism, helping them and including them and giving them as much advice and reliable information as possible. So Humanity Plus will have its Transvision conference in Madrid, hopefully coming up. And the one at USC, we're probably not going to do. It's just too dangerous in Los Angeles. So until there's a vaccine for everyone, I'm going to not do that. But I will announce the launching of the H Plus Academy, which the launch date is January 17th. And there's going to be a really heady debate between Professor and Dr. Susan Snyder, renowned NASA futurist and philosopher, and Dr. Max Moore, philosopher and author of The Philosophy of Transhumanism. And they will talk about the meta brain and looking at augmentation and identity and whatnot. And that will be a 30-minute smart steering, snappy discussion. And I will lead that and keep my nose out of it and just open it and let them go at it. And I think they have a lot in common, and there's areas that they'll certainly find interesting challenges. And then after that, we are starting our first members monthly event, which will take place and led by members. So we'll have breakout sessions, and we have 3 members who are leading their session. Greg is going to be talking about a humane humanity and values. We have Sever going to be talking about virtual reality and transhumanism, what we can do to get more of it. And then Jose Cadero is going to talk about Transvision 2021 in Madrid. And they will have their separate rooms as workshops after the Academy's roundtable discussion and debate. So that's where we are, and we're looking forward. The goal is to get more members. And because we do provide grants and we give awards. And I should have mentioned the most recent award we did an Innovators Award, and that was in our newsletter. So you can all take a look at that. But we like to not only give awards of recognition, we also like to give financial support to people who are doing interesting projects so that we can support them. And I want to see that grow. And the best way to grow is for Humanity Plus to bring in more members. And unlike other organizations that charge several hundred a year or a month to become members of, we just charge a mere $4.99 a month. I mean, that's a cup of Starbucks coffee or less. So that's $60 a year. And that money doesn't go to frivolous things. It goes to people. That money does not go to pay me. It goes to projects and people that we want to support and help educate. And I think that my separate project, Transhumanist Studies, which will be sponsored in part by Humanity Plus, that I'm looking forward to as launching, I hope, in the next few months. But it'll start out slowly but surely, but offer an educational platform for transhumanists to be faculty. And I see several here that I know will be great faculty at the Transhumanist Studies. And I look forward to that. So thank you for asking about Humanity Plus. And I love it. I miss XP Institute, and WTA was great, but out of the ashes of WTA came Humanity Plus, which engaged XP Institute and the World Transhuman Association to see beyond and take XP forward. And we do hope to bring back that extropic excitement and enthusiasm. It's there, but
yes,
it's time.
Yes, we definitely need to bring back the extropic outlook. I've held on to it over the years. And I know my friend Dan Elton recently said in our internal USTP officer chat, he feels that a renaissance of transhumanism is underway. And certainly a lot of the initiatives you described feed into this. Now, this H Plus Academy event, if I recall correctly, is coming up. It's January 17th.
Yes, that's right. It's January 17th. And we scheduled it so that our members and friends and colleagues in Europe and a little bit beyond, not maybe so much Asia, will be able to attend. So it's 9:00 a.m. Pacific Coast time. It'll be on Zoom. There'll be workshop Zooms. I was looking at Hopin, and I was going, do I want Zoom or Hopin? But the board says use Zoom, so I'll be using Zoom, and the links will be provided. But I just like the way you do your sessions, Gennady, it's really important to be there a few minutes in advance because we want to start on time because there are workshops after it. And so I'm excited about that. I think that members need to get together. They need to have a format where they can take charge and lead. And that's why I'm keeping my hands out of it. I said to our members, this is for you. You lead. I'm here to, I'll do whatever you need me to do. I'll, bring coffee. I'll do whatever you need to me. I'll work for you, but this is for members and I'm here to support you and help you facilitate.
Yeah, so the 17th will be a big day. And fortunately, those who are interested in transhumanism will be able to attend both the H Plus Academy event at 9 a.m. and then at 1 p.m. Pacific time on the same day, we'll have a USTP Virtual Enlightenment Salon with a seasteader, Michael Elliott. So a great day for transhumanism, for great conversations. Thank you for letting us know about that, Natasha. And before we get to closing remarks where we'll go around the panel and see what everybody thought about this conversation, I have one more question for you. And I think this is a very important question in regard to the situation that humankind finds itself in with the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had essentially a year of this pandemic, depending on where you look at in the world. And it has been devastating to many people, to many economies. What do you think will be the long-lasting effects of the pandemic? Will it permanently set back humanity in some way? Or have we learned enough from it? Have we experienced enough silver linings and beneficial side effects from this admittedly horrific predicament that we might be able to turn this around and accelerate progress rather than getting permanently left behind the trajectory that could have occurred otherwise? What do you think about that?
In my view, the pandemic was a slap in the face to the vulnerability of our human biology. And I think that needed to be shouted at us loud and clear. People think that they can just exist. Life is there. You'll wake up tomorrow. It's already there. You can be healthy, fine. They plan ahead their vacations, their trips, their meetings, without thinking about any virus could be around the corner. And it's not new that the pandemics, there have been, documentaries about what if we have a pandemic, but I didn't see them. I wasn't thinking about them, but now we know. And I think that goes for a lot of people. They just didn't expect it to happen. It doesn't happen to me. Well, it did. It happened to us. So now we know that we're vulnerable. So the good news out of that, wake up reality, that we do need to take a look at our biology, and it has to be enhanced. It has to be augmented, whether it's mass, which are not very high tech, but we need high tech augmentations that will preserve and protect and sustain being alive. Then we have to look at our genetic liability and turn it into genetic liberty. And I think that taking a look at the individuals with immune issues, and all of us, and if we take a look at what is a big issue that hasn't hit the news yet that we can discuss here, none of us are privileged when it comes to this. We're all human, we're all vulnerable, and that is, everyone shares that to whatever degree. So everyone has had that to face. A lot of people are disrespectful of it, but that's their problem, not ours. We know that we're vulnerable, and we know that we have to overcome this. I don't think there was any advances politically speaking. I think it was just horrible to watch the news and the anger and the blame and blaming here and blaming there. And it's just, it was the lowest common denominator of political engagement, let's call it. And so that was very sad to see. A few rose above it, but the squad, I found that disruptive, Pelosi disruptive, even McConnell disruptive. I mean, every side, everyone was playing mean girls, mean boys. I think that we can learn from that and see that that just doesn't work. And I admire the ones who just didn't get involved in it, that didn't comment on it and didn't say anything, like Peter Diamandis, not one word about it from him. And he took the high road. And I think that as transhumanists, we can take the high road and not get into those political squabbles, because you can be left, right, up or down. It doesn't matter. We have our goals. Let's keep our eyes on the prize and head in that direction. So my takeaway is the big slap in the face to all of humanity is the vulnerability. And then, of course, the sad parts is those elderly and in the assisted living areas, the poor, impoverished that are stuck in close quarters, and taking a look at that and realizing, for God's sake, let's do something about that. This enough is enough is enough. So I hope that advances will come from that.
Yes, absolutely. The year has been incredibly divisive politically. We at the USTP have tried to stay above that all, but we did experience people from the hard left and the hard right trying to drag us into the fray. Mm-hmm. And it took a lot of creativity. It took a lot of willpower to resist that temptation and just to stay the course with Charlie's campaign, with Liz Parrish, with the very positive messages that they articulated about unity, about coming together to solve our problems, which is what humanity should have done. Unfortunately, it seems pandemics, times of stress like this, they bring out a lot of human character faults, especially when people are stressed, when their living circumstances are uncertain, they're more likely to act out. And we definitely saw a lot of that this past year. Now, Daniel Twett in the chat essentially characterized this past year as a kind of warning shot to humanity. And a lot of that was also evident from your comments. So let's hope that humanity takes it seriously, that we develop the capacity to come together and solve grand societal problems like the COVID-19 pandemic, instead of letting it fracture us and divide us into these tribes. So thank you for those remarks. Now let's go around the panel and hear some closing comments or questions from all of the remaining participants. And then as the conclusion, as is our common practice, we'll let our guest have the last word. So Charlie, since we mentioned your campaign, why don't you go ahead and share with us your impressions?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. First of all, great to see you, Natasha. I think we've been friends for a long time, and I've known about you for even longer, for decades. All the work you've done, all the way from Extra P days. I remember seeing covers of you and Max on magazines and thought this is the coolest couple I ever saw. With regard to some of the things we've touched upon and what we just talked about with regard to the, the recent political atmosphere, and since I did, run for president under the Transhumanist Party banner, I was kind of forced to confront these issues. But what I will say is that it was kind of, I hate to say good timing because it was such a tragic time, but of all the events that could have occurred, death was upon us. I mean, especially in the United States, where because there was a mishandling of the way we dealt with early on, with the way our leadership dealt with it early on, hundreds of thousands of people died. And I don't think that would have been the case had we done what the slogan for the United States Transhumanist Party is, which is to put science and technology at the forefront of politics. As had come up with some of my interviews, and they said, well, what would your type of administration done differently? I said, well, for one thing, we would have, had we already been in power, let's say we won in 2016. I mean, the whole idea of being, proactionary and devising ways to combat this kind of virus, which was already perceived and understood to be coming our way by people like Bill Gates, we would have been on top of that. That's the whole idea of transhumanism, right? I mean, we want to live. We don't want to die. So when I had the discussion, I always said, look, we're all about living. We're about not letting these people die. And we want to find the solutions. We think that this would have solved so much. I mean, not just the saving of lives, but with technology and had the technology been advanced much further, our healthcare system would be a lot less expensive. So there's so many things that the platform that we stand for would benefit if more people knew about it. And I do think that, when we were talking a little bit ago about identity and people, as they mature, they'll start to solidify that. I do think, though, you have to look at Natasha's students when they're playing around with identity. They're going to experience their growth and their maturity a lot different than what we did, because there's going to be, look what we're seeing with Elon Musk and Neuralink. The fact that we're going to have attachments directly to the cloud, and you're going to have this new generation is essentially going to have, the ability to be much, much smarter than what we normally are accustomed to as far as humans go. They might have IQs that we just can't fathom. So, and then, that could lead into the idea of multiple consciousness, with virtual reality. And there's so many things to touch upon that it gets pretty heady, but it's pretty exciting. I always find it that way. I'm excited that Natasha and Humanity Plus is going to have their launching, which is January 17th with that academy and the studies. I think that's a great thing. I think one of the things that's important, is getting the word out. And Natasha, you were there back when I held that conference in 2007. I brought Shatner in because I wanted more publicity. And really, even though we had Ray Kurzweil and you and Max and Aubrey and Peter Diamandis and all these, we even have Martin Van Minsky, the most attention came because we had Shatner. And now that was 2007. Things have changed. When I was running for office, I was looking for endorsements from celebrities, and I saw a lot. I did actually contact major celebrities or their managers, and they didn't have a problem with transhumanism. They were more concerned about not letting Trump win, so they didn't want to really they didn't want a third party to take away votes. So they were just like, not right now. But I can see where it was, they were, really open to it. And by the way, with regard to Hollywood, if you look at the nature of Hollywood, and I've been involved in it, there's a parallel to our lives, Natasha. You're just more, you really are much more focused with regard to transhumanism and how it grew. But I obviously I was a big proponent of it, and I learned about it, and I found out that there was people like you and Max and all that early in the even in the 80s, but the 90s. But Hollywood is something where there's always had to be good guys and bad guys. And if you look way back, the Indians and cowboys and Indians, right? Indians were bad guys and cowboys. But eventually that fell away. And then later on, it was like aliens were the bad guys and we went to war with them. Now it's going to be robots for a little while. But we're eventually customizing ourselves to that. And they're not going to, it's not always going to be good guys, bad guys, robots being the bad guys. As you can see even in TV shows like Upload, and there's now this acceptance where we see like, oh, this isn't a bad thing, that this can help. And we're gonna, and the young generation is the ones that's embracing that. And I'm excited about that. And so, you know, one of the things I was going to mention, and I should probably ask this question of Max, but I think you know him. The thing about it is that right now, as of just like in the last couple of days, it's been announced all over the news that, you know, Larry King has been diagnosed with COVID, and he's in the hospital. He's been hospitalized, and I got to check on it today, see where he's at. But that, as you probably, well, you know, I'm sure that he is a big proponent of cryonics. I mean, he's been talking about that since, I think the first time it came out was in 2011, where it was kind of brought upon on the news when he came out and says, well, I'm looking to be cryopreserved. And that's been a thing that he's talked about for a long time. So I'm hoping that, you know, Max and Alcor and whoever is, and I don't know if he has a policy, but I hope he does, because if that's the case, that, you know, if you can get, if he gets cryopreserved, you know, Larry King is a kind of a beloved guy in the media world. And if he gets cryopreserved, that's positive publicity. And it brings a lot of attention to our movement and to what you're about to launch on January 17th. So I'm just putting that out there because I see that as a way to save somebody's life who really believes in cryonics, but also as a media exposure thing. So I just want to mention that. But again, there's so many things that need to be done and talked about. And I think you're a great representative of that, Natasha. I've always thought that, and I'm glad that, you know, you came today to talk with us. And I look forward to all the events that you're going to be involved in, and I'll be involved in over the future. So thanks again.
Yes, thank you, Charlie. And now let's go to Tom Russ.
Yeah, just echoing what Natasha was saying about being slapped in the face this year. Other than the fragility of human life, I think it was a real slap in the face to realize just the lack of critical thinking out there and the abundance of willful ignorance that shocked me. And there was also a real challenge to balance staying above the fray, not getting pulled into the Machiavellian, you know, arguments designed to divide us, but also speaking up when necessary. That was a real challenge for me. I tried very hard not to get pulled into these arguments, but I also wanted to go on the record of expressing my dismay at certain issues along the way. So it's been a real exercise this year in that type of balance, and to really understand the power. I've talked about this before, of the algorithms that are launched against us, that are dividing us, that are very sophisticated at putting us in certain bubbles. And it's just amazing when you realize that. People that I've respected intellectually, finding out that they believe something that is just so off the wall, and vice versa. I'm sure I believe things that, you know, they would think were crazy too. So it's just it's been a real exercise in realizing that that's a reality too, not just the fragility of our physical nature, but the fragility of our cognitive abilities. And so I think we're coming out stronger from it, hopefully. There's still going to be some challenges, obviously, politically going forward, but it also emboldens us to be more forthright and to ignore what needs to be ignored, but to have to stake a claim where one needs to be staken.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Tom, for those remarks. Now let's go to Art Ramon Garcia.
Yes, just a quick question. I grew up in the 70s, and I remember my idol back then was Steve Austin, you know, the $6 Million Man. And, you know, he was an astronaut, he got injured, he became a cyborg, and then he became a government secret agent. So there's been a lot of interest by state governments in funding, you know, super soldier programs, and they seem to have no problem when it comes to, funding these programs. So what are your thoughts on that? How can we leverage the fact that, the government wants to do it?
My thoughts on it? Well, DARPA. I would say it's DARPA or the DoD, the Department of Defense. They've got the money, they have the prowess, they have the capability, and they have the interest in doing it. I've been hired by DARPA and the Department of Defense as a futurist to consult on enhancement. And their interest is largely and non-invasive. So anything that can be augmented externally, but not internally. And we all know from the transhumanist perspective and the issues that nanomedicine is internal. That would seem invasive to some, but the only way you can build up the strength of your cellular structure from the molecular scale is with nanomedicine. You can engineer genetics as much as you want, but it's not going to take hold to be that $1 million man or that, incredible being without every level of your cellular structure being engineered to be sufficient and to create the homeostasis on a moment-to-moment basis. But yeah, the 70s were great. I think we need to go back to that. That's part of the issue that was brought up today on how to get to that extropic exuberance of positive sensibility about technology. And as we're, going over the trenches or the minefield of this social side over here that we discussed today, that we're going to have to be aware of and take an offense with, and not defend, but take a smart offense with.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Natasha. And now we can go to Alexandria Black. She has a question in the chat. If she wants to also ask it directly, please feel free to do so. Go ahead.
Okay, I forgot which question, but I'm going to start off anyway and let me know what I missed. First of all, it is so good to finally meet you, Natasha, and looking forward to working with the community. Okay, I want to show you something. Here is Mom. She's almost 90 years old. I've got a babysitter up there right now. But the point is that we know that dementia can be helped with hyperbaric oxygen. But I asked her doctor about it, not recommended, because those tanks are full of COVID patients that she is just so far down the triage list. I also can't get her ISRIB, even though I seem to have friended the Dr. Susanna Rossi that did the study. What else was I going to? Oh, I have this question about what if we played around with GPT-3 and fed it a lot of transhumanist materials? I'm sure you have quite a library of such things. What if we influenced the evolution and helped it have a better moral compass and better aims by feeding it these materials? What did I miss now, Gennady?
That was the question, yes. So GPT-3 is this incredibly powerful AI language that was developed very recently that can form very cogent statements. Indeed, I co-wrote a little short story with GPT-3 about a robot who has to demonstrate in a future world that it is immortal and indestructible. I posted it on my Facebook page. It was just a funny little episode where GPT-3 helped me co-write that short story. But it's an interesting notion that you have where this system, if you fed it transhumanist ideas, could it become let's say, more ethically directed? What do you think about that, Natasha? Could AI be helped with a lot of these transhumanist writings from yourself and other thinkers?
Yes, I do think so. I do agree. And it's very interesting comments, which is, it adds oomph to the discussion. In closing, a couple of things. My mother lived to 99. She was in her 100th year and she passed. She stayed with Max and I here in Scottsdale, and we took care of her final years. She had dementia, and it's a horrible disease. And it's not like Alzheimer's. You don't die from it, you die of it. It's every stage in it. There's, the stages that you go through are more horrific than the one before. I think that unless and until we have nanomedicine to clean up the some of the mess in the brain that is deteriorated from dementia and can align better with smart AI, it's nothing we can do about it now. And I'm sorry to say that. I'm sad to say that, but that's just the fact. I worry about it. I wonder if it's hereditary, and I'm a chronicist, so I'm certainly not going to wait around till my brain is mush before I'm going to go into chronics. So there's another area that we need to be aware of and need policies on. This goes back to what I was talking earlier about the right of your identity. Do you own your identity? Well, if you own your identity and you want to go in cryonics, or you want to upload or whatever it is, then that's your right. And that would tie into death with dignity, or a way to cease on this platform of existence to go into another platform in a stasis mode or a transitionary mode. The issue of GPT-3, well, that is almost like fake news. It's what there's this fake, what is it called? Fake documentary. I'm going to get it wrong. But it takes people's faces and changes it, or you can make anyone into anyone. And I was asked to speak at an event in Europe on a fake death, and where they brought back dead people and pretended that they were alive through faking them into some game. And I said, I find this highly unethical. I take death seriously, and I take life extension seriously. And if we're going to create 3D people, then let's get that straight and not make it into a fake thing. Let's make it a real thing. So you see a lot of stuff going on that's going to be pulling us in different directions. And it's here it goes, critical thinking. Let's pay attention to who's doing it, how they're doing it. Eventually GPT-3 will be good, but how does that differ from what Ben Gertz was working on with empathy for Sophia? And if GPT-3 helps Gennady write something, then it's an assist. So it's not an agency itself, and it's assist. But then the bigger question here, to get at what you were talking about, is the dementia, Alexandria, and what type of neurointerface could suppress that or enhance the cognitive reasoning that is still functioning to outperform the part of the brain that is not performing. And that, of course, is an area of neuroscience, which I'm not an expert in. But I think we all should keep our ears to the wind on this and stay as alert as possible. But also be aware that there's a lot of hyperbole out there and a lot of fluff that it's not going to solve the problem. If we get distracted, it's a red herring. We go over there and think, oh, maybe this could work. But we're missing the boat over here, that if the brain's deteriorating because of the synapses of the dendrites are not firing and sending electrical charges, then we need to get nanomedicine in the brain. And so then that becomes a legal issue. And then we need legislation on people being able to say that they own their identity, they own their brain, and it's their right to do that, rather than waiting for a billion years for the FDA to approve nanomedicine. But
As a
good,
follow-up,
it's taking us in the right path. Thank you.
As a follow-up to that, I really suggest you check out Susanna Rossi's recent study about ISRIB, ISRIB. It is reversed brain aging in mice with one application. It'll clear up all this senescence crap in the brain, but they won't give it to her. And I hope that we can interview Susanna Rossi. But I would check her out. And also back to, I was going to mention Julie Albright's book, Left to Their Own Devices. It's a bestseller in its category. It was written, I think, last year. She's a USC professor. Are you familiar with her?
No, I'm not. I'm familiar with the book and the concept, of course.
A lovely person. You should know her.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm Googling her right now. I don't waste a moment.
Yes, and for the benefit of our viewers, I posted in the YouTube chat a link to an article from University of California, San Francisco, dated December 1st of 2020, called Drug Reverses Age-Related Mental Decline Within Days. And this is about ISRIB, the drug that Alexandria mentioned. So everyone look into that and essentially determine what you think of it after evaluating the evidence. Now let's go on to Dan Elton. Dan, what are your closing remarks?
Well, just wanted to thank Natasha for coming on. And I think that discussion about the history of transhumanism was really fascinating for me. I realized there's a lot of characters in that story I was not aware of, and a lot that I need to dig into, because it helps you understand the movement now, learning about the history and what it's already gone through. As far as the pandemic, I just want to say that there were some developments that I think have been positive that came out of the pandemic. We've already talked about how people are, a little more worried about future pandemics, which is obviously great. But on top of that, I do think we're seeing some pushback against social media, because it occurred to me just now that maybe what happened was, since people are at home so much, they're spending so much more time on Facebook. People got a little more. It was more front and center, and there was this great documentary that came out called The Social Dilemma, which really was very eye-opening for a lot of people about the problems with the current social media. So, I'm actually coming out of all this turmoil, and I'm actually kind of optimistic that humanity that social media may be evolving in a more positive direction, and people are waking up to the filter bubbles and all of the the bots and all of the problems on social media. So that's one thing I'm optimistic about, is I think people are going to demand better social media that serves them better. Another thing is, actually, this was an amazing year for SpaceX. It was an amazing year for Neuralink. And we're seeing an AI as well. So I think we have a lot to look forward to in the next few years. It's going to be an exciting time, and transhumanism is going to be more relevant than ever. So anyway, thanks a lot for this discussion. It was really fascinating.
Yes, thank you very much, Dan. And I agree, there's a lot to look forward to, especially once humankind overcomes this pandemic. As my friend Rowan Horn likes to say, don't die. Very emphatically, do not die during these next few months, and then you will have a wonderful future to come. David Shoemaker, let's hear your concluding thoughts.
Yes, thank you. Natasha, thank you so much for being here. You always bring great views and great information wherever you go, and I'm glad it was here today with us this afternoon. Also, thank you so much for Humanity Plus, and I'll say that besides being a member of the Transhumanist Party, I'm also very grateful to be a member of Humanity Plus. And for people that are saying, I'll put a shameless plug out there, that they too should investigate membership in Humanity Plus. It's an organization that overlaps our goals here very well. And maybe with that thought in mind, earlier in the conversation, you mentioned about transhumanist studies debuting in February. And I think I would like to know a little more about that, if you could do that here in the next moment or two.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, David, for your kind words and supportive words. They not only support me, but they support all of our members, and past, present, future. I mean, it's one organization evolves into another and another. And I think that's the beauty of Humanity Plus. It has embraced XP Institute and the World Transhuman Association, remove the the ashes of WTA's political rivalry and resprung anew and afresh. And I think that I think it's good. I think it's a very good thing. And thanks to Nick Bostrom and James Hughes and Julia Pricio and all those who worked so hard early on with the organization. So, okay, transhumanist studies. So I thought, okay, well, you may not know, but most of you may know, I lost my job this year. I was faculty at the university where I have been teaching for 8 years. It was age discrimination. I was forced into retirement when I turned 70, and yes, I am 70, or over 70. And so it's something that I see that is so anti-transhumanist, it's frightening. And you all know me well, or a little bit, and know that I'm not someone that would ever retire, and that I love education, and spent most of my life in the education and entertainment and arts sector. So 2 areas that I adore. And what's the good news is that I have so many students around the world that want to learn and are asking questions. And I saw a big gap. And I've noticed this over the years, the misinformation about transhumanism. One person says one thing, another one says another thing. People write things, they confuse information. Then you have your postmodernists looking at it, and then you have your cyborgists looking at it and pushing that trans-progressive agenda. And there's so much stuff going on, and all of it's good, none of it's bad, but it just needs to be organized. And in my head, it's organized, but it hasn't been organized outside the FAQ or the Declaration or, the transhumanist reader. And so now that so many people are writing about transhumanism, and the past year, I've been paying attention to what's being written and how it's being written. And I see that a lot of the information is wrong, especially the history. It keeps on mentioning Nick Bostrom and James Hughes. They didn't join the movement till the late 1990s. What? I don't understand. I mean, Nick Bostrom, I value very much. I like him. I remember he came to meet me and Max in Los Angeles years ago, before he got his doctorate. Of course, James Hughes, I respect and enjoy very much, but it's not them saying it, it's other people writing this because they see their names. And that's okay to recognize it. And everyone should be recognized that contributed, but it's not their transhumanism, it's our transhumanism. And likewise, it's not Max's transhumanism or my transhumanism. Transhumanism doesn't change based on who's talking about it. It is what it is. It's like a rose, Gertrude Stein, a rose is a rose is a rose. It is a rose. So within transhumanism is something I've mentioned to Gennady in the past, is that there can't be people who are alt-right or deathists or bigots in transhumanism. It's not part of the nature of it. And so people may call themselves transhumanists, but they're not, they don't know what it means. And it is a practice, it is a way of life. And certainly there's optimism with it. There's practical optimism, there's objectivity and critical thinking, there's visionary thinking, there's overcoming odds, there's a will to survive, there's an impetus to help and share knowledge and to see humanity as a species and where we've come from in our evolution and where we could be headed, and to help steer that. So that is a passion. And to understand that, you have to feel it. You got to walk the walk. So people may not get it at first, but then fall into it, in step with it, and that's all great. And it's diverse. You can have your political views or your religious views, but you can't be a transhumanist and say you think death is a must. We have to die to keep the balance of nature. It's an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense. So I think that's some of the confusion that's out there, and especially politically. And this ties into the USTP. There is no left socialist transhumanist. Okay, wait, no, forget that. There are socialists who are transhumanists, libertarians, transhumanists, Republicans, Democrats, etc. But there is no democratic transhumanism. Transhumanism, by its nature, supports democracy. What is democracy? It's a balance. You have your rights. Now, is democracy always good? No. If the majority believes that we all should die and we live in a democratic order, what does that mean? By law, we should all die, right? So we have to be careful about these terms like democracy. And Winston Churchill, I don't know if it was him who said it, but democracy is the best of what we've got, but it's not the best of what we can do. So that's why we need a new way to organize and look at the values within transhumanism and to emerge it into the future of humanity. So to answer your question, that's the passion I have behind this. And I wanted to open that up for you so you'd see it, because I believe in being real about this. Because there's so much confusion and misinformation, I thought we need a real studies place. Okay, so then, yes, I'm doing it. The website will go up in February. It'll probably be through Teachable. I'm not sure. I think Teachable is pretty good. The curriculum for the first course is already written. It'll be the books that are out there. But generally, you can get a certificate. You won't be able to get a degree because I'm not a university. But my goal with it, and here's my end goal. My goal is to build it up so it has that scholarship and that quality and freedom of thought and thinking and collaboration and aspiring to build structures of thinking, and that it actually goes into academics. Because in academics, in the social sciences department and humanities, we have gay and lesbian studies, we have feminist studies, we have African studies, we have Black studies, we have LGBTQ studies. What else do we have? Yeah, so these studies started out slow. We do not have transhuman studies as core curriculum within the humanities or the social sciences department. And that's where I see that this could go and be something that's already presented and carved out that could be assembled with a curriculum writ for most of the courses, and some of the faculty who are you all and others will be welcome to lecture on, etc. So that is my project. And it's because I'm not teaching anymore. I'm not working as a professor at a university. I'm working as a professor at different universities and still lecturing as a futurist. But I think that there's a gap, and this is needed in that regard. So how it's going to feed out will be determined, but it's own. The website's already signified, and it's now, and I think it's a good thing to announce that it's already happening so someone else doesn't do it. And I don't think that I certainly don't want to do it alone. I like working with a team. I like getting ideas, and I like people making suggestions and seeing how things can be better. And I'm not a sole practitioner. I don't work well on my own. I like working with other people.
Yes, well, I think the emergence of transhumanist studies is going to be fascinating and is going to give a more systematic introduction to the movement to a lot of the people who are interested in it. Of course, transhumanism as a term is becoming more widespread in the culture, but I still perceive this awareness gap. Sometimes when you mention transhumanism, people wonder what it is, but to some extent that's good because it means the conspiracy theorists, the detractors haven't gained the ability to characterize that term. We still have the ability to characterize that term and essentially shape how it is perceived. So hopefully this project will enable a positive and accurate perception of transhumanism. And by the way, hopefully the success of transhumanism will mean age discrimination will be finally overcome, because when you're 700 and I'm 663 and we all look like we're 25, what will age matter anymore, other than the fact that we can say we've seen the pre-transhumanist era?
It's so funny because it's kind of like, it's kind of like my worst nightmare, but it's almost the funniest thing. I have to take it like Monty Python. It's such a ridiculous thing that I have to laugh. It's almost funny. It's like a dark comedy. It's like watching Black Mirror. So you have this futurist who's talking about not aging and who's been supporting this and created a movement about thinking like futurists, not aging and always staying working and never retiring. Is told she's, is retired by the mainstream. But I see that as it's almost like, phew, I don't want any part of that. That type of thinking is what is important to steer away from, because it's kind of like that quicksand. It pulls you in and tries to turn you into one of their, gremlins or whatever they're called. It tries to mold you into what they want you to be. And it's sticky stuff and not good. So I'm happy, it's all great. It's funny. I joke about it because it is. It's like Black Mirror. It's just funny.
Well, but now you get to work on this project in which perhaps you could bring your unique talents and knowledge to bear, even to a much greater extent than you could at the university. So there is that side of it, and we hope that great things will materialize from it. And now the time has come for closing remarks from our guests. So Natasha, what else do you want to say regarding this conversation? Any ideas you want to elaborate upon as we conclude?
Yes, thank you for asking. Okay, so my takeaway is this. What a lovely group of people to spend an afternoon with. I mean, I can't think of a more refreshing and lovely few hours I've had. Insightful, intelligent, kind, generous. It's everything that I would like communication to be. And it's thinking of a year ago with the USTP. I'm so glad you're here now and not where you were. And I think that shows a great maturity on the part of the USTP that always steer towards, to kindness and get away from anyone who's causing disruption, because that's that quicksand, it'll pull you in and try leading you down a path, and it's all around us. And so I think one of the things that comes out of this discussion as well is the continuity of our person, our identity, and being strong in who we are and in facing all the odds. And some of you discussed, some of the COVID and having to just stay clear on what you were doing and stay away from stuff. I think that's a good way. That's, I think, a lovely way to engage in the practice of training, like doing yoga or Zen, or it's just how you live your life with that mindset's really important. Not easy, mind you, not easy, but it's worth the challenge. So, and I want to thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity. Again, I appreciate it, and much love to you all.
Yes, thank you very much, Natasha. And I would echo that. We had a great conversation about continuity and about change and about how they interrelate. So this is what the Virtual Enlightenment Salons are about. And I hope that our members and visitors will keep joining us every Sunday as we discuss transhumanism and a variety of interrelated issues. And until then, live long and prosper.
I can't do that, so I do this.
All right.